In the Planescape campaign setting for D&D, there are 17 outer planes, which are essentially the realms of D&D's afterlife. There's one for each moral alignment, ranging from lawful evil to chaotic good, and everything in between. I've already covered the planes of lawful evil, lawful good, chaotic evil, neutral lawful good, lawful neutral, chaotic good, chaotic neutral, and chaotic neutral evil in depth, as well as Sigil, the city that sits at the center of the outer planes. In this video, I'll be covering the plane of neutral chaotic good, the wilderness of the Beastlands. I'll be using sources from all editions of D&D, but as usual, most of it comes from the Planescape books of 2nd edition. If you're wondering why I chose to cover the Beastlands this time, it's because my supporters over on Patreon voted for it. If you're a fan of what I do and would like to support me, you can join my Patreon for as little as $2 a month and gain the ability to vote on my videos as well. You also get access to update posts, ad-free videos, audio-only versions of videos weeks before the final version is published, my video scripts, and you get your name at the end of my videos. So thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for helping to make videos like these possible. I'd also like to thank the sponsor of this video, DiceNest.com. DiceNest makes luxury handcrafted dice. You can find dice made out of gemstone, resin, metal, wood resin blends, and silicone. I have 4 sets of their dice, and I really like them. This time, they sent me their Fate Arsenal set in Bloodfield Silver. These are definitely the most interesting dice I own, if you can call them dice. Most of them are more like spinners. And this one, I actually have no idea how it's supposed to work. But while these would definitely attract many eyes at the table, I prefer the more standard type of dice. My favorites that I use all the time are these Mystic Luminance ones, and I really like these Spectrum Mysterious Agate ones as well. But if you'd like some cool dice of your own, or you'd just like to support me and get something physical out of it, visit DiceNest.com and use my affiliate code WadeAllen for 15% off your order. And I'll earn 15% on all purchases that use my code. But anyway, on with the guide to the Beastlands. Since alignment is a pretty foundational part of the Outer Planes, I like to start there in understanding them, to get a sense of what the plane and its inhabitants are like, at least in theory, because sometimes the nature of the plane doesn't actually match its own alignment. Hint, hint. The Beastlands is, of course, the plane of neutral chaotic good, which is to say that it's neutral good with a slight lean toward chaos. In other words, strongly good, weakly chaotic. Alignment, in most editions, is a 2-axis scale of good to evil and lawful to chaotic. The good-evil scale is more straightforwardly about morality, and the law-chaos scale is more about one's view of how a society should be structured. In general terms, good is about selflessness or helping others, and evil is about selfishness or harming others, while lawfulness is about order, structure, and collectivism, and chaos is about freedom, randomness, and individualism. Though these definitions fluctuate and change across the editions, with some editions emphasizing certain facets more than others. The player's handbooks for each edition of D&D provide definitions of the 9 alignments, but since there are 17 outer planes, there are 8 more in-between alignments that the books don't provide descriptions of. For these, I think it makes the most sense to look at the alignments on either side and mash them together. So, in 1st edition AD&D, neutral good is about intentionally balancing law and chaos so as to bring about the most beneficial conditions for living things. Chaotic good characters view freedom and randomness as ultimate truths, while also placing value on life and the welfare of each individual. In 2nd edition, neutral good characters still do care about maintaining a balance of chaos and law, but less so. In 1st edition, it seems like a neutral good character believes that by maintaining that balance, good will arise, but in 2nd edition, the priorities are reversed. They believe that one should pursue goodness, and that pursuit will not upset the balance in the long run. So, if what it takes to pursue the good is overthrowing the social order, so be it. If fostering good means supporting an organized society, so be it. They don't see an inherent value in social structure itself. It only has value if it supports the good. And goodness, by the way, in 2nd edition, means being honest, charitable, and forthright. It means trying to correct any damage done to others. Helping those in need and protecting the weak are given as examples of good behavior. Second edition also allows for subjective and cultural differences in what it means to be good, which I find to be pretty problematic, to be honest. Especially in a world where there are literal physical representations of what good actually means, by which I mean the Outer Planes. But I've already discussed my issues with moral relativism in Planescape several times throughout my other videos, so I won't have that same discussion again here. Anyway, chaotic good characters in 2nd edition are strong individualists marked by a streak of kindness and benevolence. They have little use for laws and regulations and act according to their own moral compass that, while good, may conflict with the rest of society. And on that note, what I will say about moral relativism that I don't think I've quite said in previous videos is that I think there's a certain form of it, if moral relativism would even be the right descriptor here, that makes sense. Obviously, the biggest problem with moral relativism is when you have two moralities that are in complete contradiction. What I think is bad, you think is good, like causing suffering. Would we both go to an upper plane when we die? I don't think that would make any sense. One of us is just wrong, deluding ourselves into thinking we're good when we're actually evil. But what about when we both agree on what's good, but to different extents? You're more concerned with workers' rights, I'm more concerned with animal welfare, but we both care about both. Or we agree on what's good, but we disagree on what to do about it. You think we should refrain from using AI, I think we should blow up data centers. There's a line that I think sums this up rather well from The Humans, a book by Matt Haig, which I definitely recommend, that goes, "No two moralities match, except different shapes, so long as they aren't sharp enough to hurt." Alignment in these earlier editions has much more of a macro mindset, where characters are concerned with the cosmic forces of good or evil or what have you. Being chaotic, for example, comes along with a belief in the fundamental randomness of the multiverse, whereas alignment in later editions becomes more of a personal, small-scale thing, where being chaotic might not necessarily say anything about your view of the multiverse, but just describes how you behave. In 3rd edition, neutral good is about being devoted to others and doing the best that you can do. It means doing what is good without bias for or against order. And good in 3rd edition implies altruism, respect for life, a concern for the dignity of sentient beings, and making personal sacrifices to help others. Chaotic good characters are kind and benevolent, but they make their own way, acting as their conscience directs with little regard for what others expect. They combine a good heart with a free spirit. In 4th edition, alignment was simplified, somewhat harkening back to its AD&D roots when there was just one axis. Instead of neutral good, there is just good. But that's really just semantics, because it's the same thing. Good characters believe it is right to aid and protect those in need. And while they don't necessarily have to sacrifice themselves or put the needs of others above their own, they often do. They're keenly aware that power corrupts, often leading those in charge of society toward evil ends, and so they feel no obligation to follow the law blindly, and prefer authority to rest in the hands of the many rather than the few. But a change to 4th edition that isn't just semantics is that chaotic good does not exist. In 4th edition, the only way to be chaotic is to be evil. In 5th edition, neutral good characters do the best they can to help others according to their needs. 5th edition's definitions are all extremely simple and short, often to their detriment. But for once, that's a 5th edition definition that I can get behind. It doesn't leave much room for other alignments to exist within it, as so many of them do, and it not even mentioning law or chaos makes some amount of sense here, as it suggests that they just don't care about it. Though I do prefer 5.5e's definition, which says that they work within the rules but don't feel bound by them, which I feel helps distinguish it from the more explicitly anti-rule stance typical of chaotic characters. And chaotic good characters act as their conscience directs, with little regard for what others expect. This definition, on the other hand, is less good, because it puts no constraints on what kind of behavior your conscience might come up with that would disqualify you from being good. 5.5e does improve it a bit, by providing an example of stealing from a cruel baron to give to the poor. So, from all this, what does it mean to be neutral chaotic good? I would say that it means you place value on living beings and strive to protect them. It means you're a kind, benevolent person willing to put the needs of others above your own. It also means that you value individualism and freedom. And while you might chafe at externally imposed rules and social structure, you don't have a full-on disdain for it that a more chaotic person might have. And is that a good description of the Beastlands? Hell no. Sure, there are people and gods that live in the Beastlands who do fit that description, but overall, I just don't think it lives up to its own alignment. Honestly, this is a problem that seems to exist for most of the upper planes. They're supposed to be the physical manifestations of these good alignments, but so often there's some rather questionable traits that call into doubt how good these planes really are. For instance, Bitopia is full of people who are good-natured and helpful, but they expect to be repaid for that kindness. There's a prevailing culture of quid pro quo, which doesn't really fit into what it means to be good, in my opinion. Take Arborea as another example. It's a plane of unremitting hedonism, which is also hardly the vision of goodness. In my video on that plane, I tried to make a case for how such behavior could be in pursuit of the good, but the plane's hedonism is often explicitly destructive and harmful, like with the Bacchae. And then there's also the fact that like half the gods of the plane are evil. In practice, if not on paper, because of how little care they have for the well-being of their followers, and how capriciously and callously they ruin or even end their lives. Mount Celestia strikes me as less troublesome, but it still rouses a few questions. For instance, it's all about self-improvement, which involves becoming a better person, being kinder, more giving, more useful to others, and so on. But much like a Catholic doing good deeds to be admitted into heaven, does it not diminish the goodness of the behavior when you believe, or even know, you'll be rewarded for doing it? It's similar to Bitopia in that way, except rather than a reward from the person you just helped, you're getting a reward from the plane itself, by moving up to the next highest, more splendorous heaven. Would it not be better to do good things with no expectation of reward? And with the Beastlands, I have perhaps even more questions. This is often the point of these videos that a certain subset of the audience finds tedious and annoying, if they haven't already been thinking that since the very beginning of this section. If that's you, that's why I provide timestamps. You could just skip the next section. And for this video in particular, I can imagine even more people than usual being upset, as what I'm about to talk about, roughly 96% of humans disagree with, but I think for bad reasons. Though I don't want to encourage skipping parts of the video too much, as how it often goes is that the people who don't want to listen the most are the ones who would benefit the most from listening. I think we've created a world where it's far too easy to curate everything you interact with and completely avoid anything that you disagree with or that would challenge you, intellectually or morally. Like some of the other upper planes, my question about the Beastlands amounts to, how is this place good? I think the slight chaotic lean makes sense, though I think it would make even more sense if it was positioned on the Great Wheel even further on the chaos side. Arborea has far more organized societies than the Beastlands does, so at the very least, I feel like these two planes should swap places. Though, to be honest, I feel like the Beastlands is neutral at best. I'll get into more of the details of what the Beastlands is like in the next section of the video, but a bit of that information is relevant here. The Beastlands, as the name suggests, is a plane of raw and untamed wilderness. It is the crystallization of all that is natural and wild. It's a savage, brutal, eat or be eaten place. So how is that good? Well, this book says it isn't. It says that eat or be eaten isn't good, isn't bad. It's just how it is. But this is supposed to be a good plane. Nature is often thought of as the benchmark of true neutrality. For example, druids who preserve the workings of the natural world and otherwise just stay out of things are typically considered to be true neutral. Additionally, in D&D sources, animals are considered unaligned, where alignment does not apply, which, practically speaking, amounts to neutrality. Especially in 4th edition, where unaligned is essentially just the true neutral alignment option. In the Beastlands is a plane mostly made up of animals behaving like animals, killing each other brutally on a daily basis. At best, that can surely only be neutral, right? But I don't even think it is. I would argue that the natural order is actually skewed toward evil, due to things like predation, disease, starvation, and parasitism. It's a common misconception that predators kill their prey quickly, and that the prey experiences minimal suffering. Sure, that can happen, but it's not like the predator is trying to be merciful. They're not even necessarily trying to kill. They're trying to immobilize and neutralize, to render their prey incapable of running away or fighting back. A lion doesn't care if the water buffalo is dead by the time it starts eating. Plus, in the heat of the chase, you're just trying to get in any swipe you can in an effort to slow your prey down. So it's not even like the pain comes all at once. And of course, the chase itself is pretty much the most extreme terror you could imagine. There's certainly no world where that can be considered good. Perhaps you'd wish to downplay the pain, fear, and suffering that non-human animals face, but there's no reason to think the pain they feel is any less vivid than the pain we feel. Essentially, all animals feel pain. There are a very small handful that possibly don't, such as jellyfish that don't have brains or even central nervous systems, but even invertebrates have nociceptors, specialized nerves that detect harm. Of course, there is a distinction to be made between simply detecting harm and consciously or emotionally suffering from it. But all vertebrates, which includes mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish, have the brain structures necessary to consciously feel pain, same as we do. So yes, despite the common notion that they don't, fish feel pain. And there are even many invertebrates that very much seem to suffer from pain. And they probably do. It's just harder to be sure how similar their experience of it is to ours. Like arthropods, for example, because their brains are rather different from ours. It seems like we've got this deeply anthropocentric view that surely humans are a special exception from the entire rest of the universe, and so we stupidly and cruelly believe that other creatures can't feel pain. Or if they can, it's in some lesser form that doesn't even warrant consideration. We've got this imagined hierarchy of animal life, with us at the top, and if we ever acknowledge the moral worth of another animal, it starts at the top and very slowly creeps downward. It's just pure, unbridled chauvinism, though, as every time we look into whether or not some animal or other can feel and perceive pain, we find more evidence that they do. Some invertebrates, like bivalves, do seem less likely to be able to consciously suffer pain, and others seem far, far more likely, such as octopus and lobsters. And I'd say they most definitely can. In fact, England recently put more stringent animal welfare laws in place that officially recognize decapods, such as lobsters, crabs, and crayfish, and cephalopods, such as squid and octopus, as sentient beings capable of experiencing pain and suffering. The law bans boiling lobsters alive, but still allows them to be killed, which doesn't go nearly far enough in my opinion, but it's a start. A similar story is true of fear. Yes, there are probably different types of fear that we as humans can feel that non-humans never do, or do to a lesser extent, like more cerebral, abstract fears. But fear is by no means exclusive to humans. Humans may possess a larger prefrontal cortex than other animals, which allows for more complexity and executive functioning, aka decision-making and impulse control. But the amygdala, which is the fear center of the brain, is not part of the prefrontal cortex. All mammals have amygdalae, and animals that don't, such as birds, reptiles, and fish, have homologous brain regions, different brain structures responsible for processing fear. Besides, I doubt most of us have ever experienced the sheer terror of running for your life from someone intent on killing you, whereas non-humans definitely have, at least any wild animal that isn't an apex predator. Anyway, I think predators are often considered neutral or unaligned, and certainly not evil because they're just acting off instinct, presumably not making conscious moral decisions and doing what they have to survive. Which is fair enough. There's an idea called moral situationism, where the same behavior can have a different moral value depending on the situation. And I think that's obviously true. It's pretty different to steal from the poor than it is to steal from the rich, and more different still if you're starving. Normally, I'd say that killing people is wrong, but I wouldn't begrudge anyone who killed someone who was trying to kill them. Hunting down and killing an antelope because you legitimately have no other way to survive is certainly much more permissible than doing it for fun. But isn't the same thing true of many other creatures that are classified as evil in D&D? Like Umber Hulks? They have to kill to survive, same as lions. Thinking about it this way, maybe it would make sense to classify some animals as evil. Speaking in non-D&D terms, what's really the difference between an animal and a monster? Isn't a monster just an animal that people consider to be evil? At least for the most part. Another part of that, I think, is that we mostly use the term monster to describe things that are fictional. But if they existed in real life, they'd be animals. For instance, if owlbears or dragons were real, it's possible we would still refer to them as monsters, but really they'd just be animals. Though I don't even think we would refer to them as monsters, because if they existed in real life, we'd be used to them. They wouldn't seem at all unusual to us, and so it would be strange to use a word for them that largely applies to fictional creatures. We'd think of them in much the same way we think of other aggressive and dangerous animals. In D&D, monster is just the broad term for any creature with a stat block. There are all sorts of types of monsters, and monstrosity is just one of them. But I think if D&D's monsters existed in the real world, the majority of them would be classified as animals. And yes, it's true that the monstrosity creature type doesn't necessarily equate to evil. It's more of a category for creatures that don't belong in any other category. For instance, a mimic is a monstrosity, but it's neutral. But then you've got Umber Hulks, which are also monstrosities, and they're chaotic evil. But what's really the difference in behavior that makes one neutral and one evil? They're both ambush predators that have no mercy. You might say it's their intelligence. An Umber Hulk is a pretty intelligent creature, so it at least has the capacity to think through its decisions and recognize what it's doing is causing suffering. But if intelligence is the distinguishing feature, well, then I think the animals in the Beastlands should be considered evil as well. At least a lot of them, because many of the animals of the Beastlands are intelligent, but they act just the same as the normal ones, making this problem all the worse, because they do have moral agency. They do have the capacity to recognize the consequences of their actions and to consider the suffering they cause. So all the justification they've really got is that of necessity. For instance, the animals that are obligate carnivores. And as I mentioned, I do think that's generally a good justification, but much less so in a fantasy setting when you can literally conjure food into existence. If a lion is intelligent and good enough to realize that causing unnecessary suffering is a bad thing, then surely that lion would seek out a way to minimize or even completely avoid causing unnecessary suffering. And if magic exists, then a relatively easy solution would be to find someone who can cast Create Food and Water, or even easier yet, Goodberry, though it's debatable whether Goodberry could feed an obligate carnivore. It is a berry, so that would indicate no, but it's also magical food, so maybe. And the spell says that each berry sustains one creature for one day, so I think it would work. And if most other people in the upper planes are good, which they pretty much have to be for it to make sense, then they'd want to provide those spellcasting services in order to save lives. But instead, the inhabitants of the Beastlands just choose to kill each other for some reason. Because it's authentic, I guess. You might be thinking, couldn't these good-aligned predators procure their meats humanely? Perhaps instead of hunting their prey and ripping them to pieces, they could kill them quickly and unexpectedly. Perhaps they could farm them. I've got two things to say about that. The first is that in D&D, where there are literally evil creatures, they could opt to only consume those. An evil creature, like a demon, is going to intentionally cause suffering and misery throughout the course of its existence, so it is actually a good thing to kill them. So these good-aligned creatures could go to the lower planes to hunt for their food. That, of course, does introduce a rather large risk of death, though, so it would be much safer to just rely on spells like Create Food and Water. Also, I've got to imagine that a diet consisting of demon flesh is going to be terribly unhealthy. It probably causes cancer or something. Plus, there's also the wrinkle that not all demons are evil. They're rare, but you can find fiends who have overcome their evil nature. So if that's a possibility, perhaps it isn't so good to kill them. As Gandalf says to Frodo, "Do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends." Perhaps the demon you slew might have become good before the end, if you would have given them the chance. The other thing I have to say about that is that humane killing is mostly a myth. Sure, if an animal is suffering and there's no help for it as it's bound to die, it can be merciful to put it out of its misery. But that's not what quick kill hunting is. The animal wasn't suffering or bound to die. They could have gone on to have a long and happy life if you hadn't just ended it. Sure, it's better to die quickly and quote-unquote painlessly, but if it were going to happen to you, wouldn't you prefer to not be killed? And farming isn't any better, because you're still doing the same thing, prematurely and unnecessarily ending their life. The problem isn't just in the method of killing, it's in the killing itself. A good character values life. Plus, farming introduces all sorts of miseries, at least factory farming, which I think should be obvious to everyone. As for non-factory farming, how incredibly fucked up is it to raise an animal with supposed kindness and compassion for them to learn to trust you, only to betray that trust by slaughtering them for money, or because you like the way their flesh tastes? That is not the behavior of a good person, but it's normalized in society. Culture reinforces it as cool and good, or manly, or whatever. Everyone's doing it, so how bad could it be? 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong, but just because something is the status quo doesn't mean that it's right. But the writers of Planescape weren't vegan, and like most other people, didn't recognize the evils of eating animals, and so wrote it into what's supposed to be one of the most good planes there is, without realizing how far from good it is. Honestly, the upper planes should be comprised pretty much entirely of vegans and herbivores, because if you're good, you care about the suffering of others, and how can you justify contributing to that suffering when you literally don't need to? But what's also interesting is that killing or causing suffering being a necessity for the creature's survival isn't even enough for us to give it a pass in many cases. Take mosquitoes as an example. For them to survive, it's necessary that they suck blood, which has the unfortunate consequence of spreading disease. But there's a very popular movement to completely eliminate them from existence, at least a few specific species. If causing suffering is justified by necessity in order to survive, why don't we give creatures like mosquitoes and parasites a pass like we do with lions and bears? I think there's two reasons for that. The first is that we consider lions and bears to be majestic creatures. They're cool and beautiful, so we let more slide. Like when a hot girl gets pulled over for speeding and is let go with a warning. The second is that they don't pose nearly as much of a threat to us. We have a very self-centered attitude when determining what's acceptable in nature and what's not. It's okay that the lions are out there causing suffering because they're not doing it to us. Now, I'm not advocating that we exterminate lions or other predators, and despite toying with the idea a few moments ago, I'm not even trying to suggest that predators themselves are evil. But what I am suggesting is that the system of predation is evil. The lions are just beholden to it. And to be clear, I wouldn't say that everyone who is beholden to an evil system is exempt from being considered evil. The fact that non-human animals mostly lack moral agency is an important part of it. So maybe the animals themselves can't be considered evil, at least the unintelligent ones. But the system can, which does matter here, because it's not just the alignment of the inhabitants of the plane that we're talking about here, but the plane itself. I think many of us think of nature, including predation and the other natural systems of suffering, as neutral, simply because that's the default conditions that we were born into. We're used to it that way. But it doesn't have to be that way. Especially in a magical world like D&D, especially in a plane of existence that's supposed to be essentially a heaven. If the plane were good, why would it have an evil system? Let's imagine that a god exists and is good. Why would he create a world where the creatures have to brutally kill each other in order to survive, when he could simply not do that? Why would he create a world where children die of bone cancer, where viruses exist, where animals reproduce beyond the capacity for their environment to feed them, leading to starvation, where the water is full of parasites so that drinking from it makes you blind? He could create a world in whatever manner he likes, and he chooses one with rampant, pointless suffering. It's pointless because it didn't need to be that way. Now, a god didn't create the Beastlands, but the Beastlands are supposedly the manifestation of neutral chaotic good. So why would it be this way? My answer? It wouldn't. This plane is out of place. If it were up to me, I'd probably put it where Isgard is, and then maybe shift Isgard and Arborea up. It's not perfect, but with the planes we've got, I think that makes a little more sense. The Beastlands is pretty chaotic in terms of its freedom and lack of societal constraints. It's not good overall, I don't think, but perhaps it could make some sense in that slightly good spot because there are some good-aligned creatures and deities that live here. The Beastlands is a plane of pure, untamed nature. It's the wildest, most natural plane there is. Its primal beauty virtually untainted by outside forces. It's an infinite wilderness ruled by animals, filled with literally all kinds of natural wildlife, though it's not quite clear what natural means. It's not just referring to the types of creatures that exist in the real world, because the Beastlands is also home to lizard men, winged cats, centaurs, lycanthropes, and more. And that doesn't include magical creatures, such as dragons and beholders. But if you ask me, lycanthropes seem pretty magical in nature. And unicorns live here too, and those are definitely magical. So I suppose there's a line somewhere of what's considered too unnatural to exist in the Beastlands, and it's up to each DM to decide for themselves where that line is. The animals that call this plane home are either all intelligent with the ability to speak, or a mix of intelligent and normal animals, depending on the source. And there are giant versions of all these animals too. The Beastlands is known to some as the Happy Hunting Grounds. This name is primarily used by the clueless, mortals from the prime material world who know far less than they think they do about the Outer Planes, but it was also called this by the first planar visitors to come here, who saw how this plane was so abundant with animals and figured it was a veritable cornucopia of easy pickings. They quickly learned how incorrect they were. As I said in the last section of the video, this is a savage, eat-or-be-eaten place. It's survival of the fittest, through and through. If you come here and try to hunt the animals, you probably won't make it out alive, or at least intact. There's far more of them than there are of you, and they know how to protect themselves. Many people have learned a respect for nature the hard way. Though while this plane is a brutal and dangerous place, and you may end up on the wrong side of the hunt once or twice while you're here, I do think most of the brutality is reserved for the animals against each other. If you do come here with a firm respect for nature already in place, you don't have as much to worry about, and it's not that hard to survive. It's not like every animal here is a bloodthirsty apex predator who would have an interest in eating you. Though the sources are slightly contradictory on how dangerous this plane is to visitors. The Beastlands has the fewest settlements of any outer plane. You can still find them here and there, but they're few and far between, and typically not very large. The vast majority of the plane is made up of natural landscapes untouched by man, or, man equivalents, humanoids or whatever, tieflings, elves, and so forth. When many people think of the Beastlands, what comes to mind are the unimaginably vast forests, be they oak, spruce, birch, fir, maple, sequoia, mangrove, or even forests of giant mushrooms. And the plane is indeed home to forests of all kinds, but every type of natural environment that exists in any prime material world can be found here. Desert, savanna, meadow, steppe, jungle, mountain, marsh, tundra, glacier, ocean, and so on. All absolutely teeming with life. The air of the Beastlands is ideal for anything that grows. Calm and cool in the sequoia forests, humid and warm in the swampy regions, arid and hot in the open plains, whatever the ecosystem needs to thrive. Though all these geographical regions are laid out much more randomly than in any prime material world. Drastically different climates, such as glaciers and tropical deserts, don't exist right next to each other, but other than that, there seems to be little rhyme or reason to the placement of these regions. It's just a hodgepodge of terrain. And the weather is just as chaotic. The sky might be crystal clear one moment and pouring from the darkest storm clouds you've ever seen the next. But if the weather doesn't suit you, just wait 15 minutes and it'll change. The perfect wilderness of the Beastlands reminds many visitors of the deepest wilds back home. There is no place more natural, more wild, and more alive than the Beastlands, and that has an effect on every visitor that comes here. This place makes you feel more invigorated and more alive. Every sensation and emotion is intensified. It makes your mind aware, your reflexes sharp, and your stride quick. The sensation of hunger is more acute, but food and drink have never tasted better than they do here. Sleep is always deep and restful, and you always awaken completely alert. Mechanically, a lot of this results in a 10% improvement in all wilderness skills, such as tracking, animal handling, and direction sense. In 5th edition, you gain advantage on animal handling, perception, and survival checks. Being here liberates the spirit and brings out the beast in any who spend too much time here. Literally. As you spend time on the Beastlands, you'll begin to develop a primal change, a single physical trait from an animal associated with your highest ability score, or whatever ability score is more representative of your true nature. For instance, if that's strength, you might grow bear fur. If that's dexterity, you might grow rabbit ears. For wisdom, you might sprout owl feathers. For intelligence, you might grow a raven's beak. And for charisma, you might grow a peacock's tail. Both the traits and the animal are determined by the DM. The time it takes for these primal changes to manifest depends on your alignment. Lawful characters are better at resisting them, perhaps because they repress many of their natural reactions, and so these changes don't start to show up until they've spent 2 to 5 days on the plane. Neutral characters begin to show symptoms in 2 to 24 hours, and since chaotic characters are most given to wild, uninhibited behavior, it only takes 1 to 6 hours for their primal changes to appear. But whatever your alignment is, these changes are complete after you've spent a full week here, and they'll remain for as long as you stay in the Beastlands, plus a period of time after you've left equal to however long you spent here. So if you come to the Beastlands and grow ram's horns from your head, if you spend a month here, you'll have ram's horns for a total of 2 months. The Cagers, citizens of Sigil, refer to this as the beast pox, even though it's not contagious. The primal change isn't intended to be a hindrance, though it could be a source of embarrassment or social disgrace among the more civilized high society types of the Outer Planes. This primal change affects animals a little differently. Any animal visitors to the Beastlands are completely overcome by the plane's wild nature. Your animal companion or mount or whatever it may be immediately runs away upon entering the plane as their primal instincts are brought to the fore. Exceptionally loyal animals, like a ranger's animal follower or a mage's familiar, are affected by this as well, but they always return to their master before they leave the plane. But other animals are gone forever. The only creatures not affected by this call of the wild at all are magical ones. The plane is so vibrantly full of life that some speculate the plane, the land itself, is actually a living, breathing being. Some believe that the whole of the Beastlands is a primordial god, an embodiment of all that is wild and natural in the multiverse. Each of the Outer Planes, or most of them anyway, are divided up into layers, which are typically described as completely separate physical spaces, worlds unto themselves, really. What makes layers layers, and not completely different planes altogether, is that they all share the same theme as the plane overall, and they're all strongly linked to each other through magical connections, such as portals, barriers, and conduits, whereas separate planes are still magically linked, but more weakly. The Beastlands has 3 layers: Krigala, Brux, and Karasuthra. I'll describe these layers and all the locations within them in more depth later in the video, but I'll provide an overview here. Krigala is the layer of eternal noon. In some places, the constant glare of the sun, Celera, burns hotly, creating savannas and deserts, while in other places it barely penetrates the thick canopy of the jungle. And despite the ever-present sun, there does still manage to be colder climates as well. The river Oceanus runs directly through this layer, and the jungles and forests are thickest along it. The creatures that call this layer home are all diurnal. Brux is the land of never-ending twilight. Here, Celera and the moon, her brother Noctos, are balanced, basking the layer in a perpetual half-light. This layer is a bit cooler than Krigala, and is generally rather misty. Brux is home to crepuscular creatures, whether matutinal or vespertinal. Karasuthra is the domain of the glowing moon, a layer of endless night where Noctos reigns. The moon provides the only light in this layer, as normal sources of illumination, such as torches, lanterns, or bonfires, simply don't light. Karasuthra is home to nocturnal animals of all kinds, and all these layers are permeated by the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, despite the fact that this plane has no Norse gods. I've wondered this a few times throughout these videos, but the Beastlands makes me wonder again. How the hell do layers work? They're described inconsistently here. At times, 3 islands floating one on top of the other. At times, continuous physical spaces where to get from one layer to another, all you have to do is walk over a mountain pass, for example. Sometimes these types of descriptions are just metaphorical, a conceptualization scheme that doesn't strictly have anything to do with how the layers are literally arranged. But it can be hard to tell when that's the case and when it's literal. So are they completely separate physical spaces, or are they a shared physical space? Are they separate landmasses within the same physical space, or is it all one landmass? How do the sun and moon work? It's one sun shining on 2 layers, so does the same sun reach 2 different dimensions? Or is it a different sun, but it's just thought of as the same sun? And even if it's all one shared physical space, or even one landmass within that space, the sun still doesn't make much sense. If Krigala is physically floating above Brux, and Brux above Karasuthra, as this book describes, wouldn't Krigala block out the sun from Brux, and Brux block out the moon from Karasuthra? I suppose the answer, as ever, is magic, in that the outer planes defy explanation. But one thing is certain. Traveling between the layers of the Beastlands is easier and more fluid than in most other planes. The portals between the layers tend to be insubstantial and erratic, and are often one way. You might pass between 2 trees, or duck beneath a branch, and find yourself in a different layer, the light having changed from day to twilight, indicating that you've transitioned from Krigala to Brux, or dusk to night, from Brux to Karasuthra. And while the portal you unknowingly walked through might have been one way, portals like these are common, so you can find your way back to the layer that you want to be on fairly easily, once you get the hang of what to look for. For instance, those who find themselves in Brux and want to get back to Krigala can try following a creek or stream. Something that I think is a bit unusual about the Beastlands is how similar it is to Arborea in many ways. Both planes intensify all feelings and senses. Both have incredibly unpredictable weather. Both are giant expanses of wilderness with all the terrain and biomes jumbled up and kind of random, like a patchwork. Both are home to giant beasts. Both are home to the river Oceanus and Yggdrasil. Both have 3 layers, and both are hard to justify as fitting their alignments. But I suppose they do have different themes. Arborea's being passion and indulgence, and the Beastlands being survival and connection with nature. But what they both share is a carefreeness and lack of inhibition. Here, I've mostly been describing the Beastlands as it exists in 2nd edition, with some details thrown in from other editions where they don't contradict. But there are some actual differences between editions. In 2nd edition, there's a mix of animals with human-level intelligence and normal animals. At least, that's what it seems like. But in 1st edition, all the animals are intelligent. In 1st edition, the plane is also described as mostly forest. 1st edition specifies that magical beasts are not present, but 3rd edition explicitly includes them. 3rd edition also makes the animals speak Celestial, where it wasn't really specified before what language they spoke. The weather in 3rd edition is also not chaotic. In fact, it's so predictable that the daily rain is how the inhabitants of the plane track time. Instead of the Great Wheel, the Forgotten Realms campaign setting uses the World Tree cosmology in 3rd edition, where the Beastlands doesn't exist, but there is a plane that's very similar called the House of Nature. It's a vast expanse of natural wilderness where no artificial constructions spot the pure beauty of nature, and animals roam unfettered across the plane. Though it does seem less savage, as the animals share the land's bounty with the petitioners in peaceful coexistence. That's not to say that the bestial and non-bestial inhabitants of the Beastlands in 2nd edition are at each other's throats all the time, but you won't find any talk of peaceful coexistence in the 2nd edition books. And what's interesting is that the House of Nature is considered neutral, so it's a bit less savage, and it's still not even considered good, which makes a lot more sense to me. There is also a region in Faerun called the Beastlands, by the way, but it's unrelated. There's also no such thing as the Beastlands in 4th edition, as it uses the World Axis cosmology. But there is an astral dominion called the Deep Wilds that fulfills the same role. And like the House of Nature, the Deep Wilds is unaligned, which is 4th edition's way of saying neutral. 5th edition goes back to the Great Wheel cosmology, and so the Beastlands exists again. But the 5th edition books don't spend very many words describing the Outer Planes. One notable difference, though, is the beast transformation. It's similar to the primal change of 2nd edition, but more of a cosmic punishment. Whenever a visitor slays a beast native to the plane, they have to succeed on a charisma saving throw, or transform into the type of beast they killed. They retain their intelligence and ability to speak, and can try to make the saving throw again at the end of each long rest. If they fail 3 times, the transformation becomes permanent, only removable by magic such as the Remove Curse spell. So I guess in 5th edition, many of the animals wandering the plane might actually be people who are afflicted by that bestial transformation. 5.5e's description of the plane is much the same, but it actually attempts to resolve some of the ethical concerns I discussed earlier, as it says that the Beastlands embodies nature's wildness and beauty, but it also speaks to the animal within all living creatures, not necessarily in a fierce, predatory way, but with respect to their physical substance and fundamental needs. So it downplays the brutality aspect of the plane. It's a bit interesting that 2nd edition seems to present the strongest ethical conundrum, as the plane is supposedly good, but its description hardly matches, where other editions don't focus on the savage nature of the plane or downplay it, such as 1st and 5th, or make the plane neutral instead of good, such as the alternate cosmologies of 3rd and 4th. The way that the 3 layers are illuminated changes from edition to edition as well. Krigala is always lit by a midday sun, but in 1st edition, Brux is lit by 2 suns at opposite sides of the horizon, either perpetually setting or rising depending on your point of view, whereas 2nd edition Brux is illuminated by a single setting or rising sun, as well as a half moon. 1st edition Karasuthra is starlit rather than moonlit, and the stars wander the sky randomly. Krigala is much the same in 3rd edition as it is in 2nd, but in 3rd edition Brux, the moon isn't necessarily a half moon, and it's always hanging low on the opposite horizon as the sun. Karasuthra in 3rd edition is both moonlit and starlit, and the moon isn't always full. Instead, it changes its phase achingly slowly. 5.5e seems to remove the moon from Brux, providing just a red sun forever on the horizon, at least in the one-sentence description that the layer is given. While exploring the Beastlands, there are humanoids to be found, but for the most part, you'll just be encountering animals. So many newcomers might get the impression that this plane is devoid of people, until they eventually realize that the animals are the people, at least a great deal of them. All planes have their fair share of animals native to the plane, that are born there same as they'd be born anywhere else. But the Beastlands is unique in that many, if not most, of the animals you'll find here are actually petitioners, mortals who have died, whose souls are sent to live out their afterlives in the plane best matching their alignment, or that of their patron deity. All of these petitioners, while looking and behaving exactly like animals, are actually intelligent and can speak, and some can even cast spells, though they often choose not to speak, and even more rarely do they cast spells, as they prefer to live the natural life. And if we go by what 1st edition says, then all of the animals of the plane, whether petitioners or not, are intelligent, in which case they'd all essentially be people. All this adds to the trouble of hunting in the plane, and why it's widely considered a terrible idea, as you never can be sure if what you're hunting is a regular animal or a person. Of course, I don't think it would be a good action either way, but even those who don't care about the lives of animals often refrain from hunting in the Beastlands once they learn that their prey might in fact be sapient, if they haven't already been eaten before they learn their mistake. In most cases, if you go to the Beastlands as a petitioner after death, you take on the animal form that best suits your nature, like the primal changes that all visitors face, but to the extreme. A resolute ranger might take the form of a grizzly bear, a bard might take the shape of a songbird, and a thief might appear as a rabbit, for example. In 3rd edition, petitioners actually start out as whatever form they were in life, and are basically affected by a primal change that just never stops, turning them fully into an animal after a few centuries. And if you could cast spells in life, then you still can as an animal. Not all of the petitioners take the forms of animals, though, just most of them. For instance, centaurs who worshipped Scarret in life, which is probably most of them, will retain their centaur forms when they come here. But what's also unique about the Beastlands is that the petitioners weren't all once mortal people. Actually, this is probably most of them, because all animals come to the Beastlands when they die, drawn by the primal nature of the plane and the protection of their animal lord, which is something I'll talk about in the next section. So I guess it's true what they say. All dogs go to heaven, if you can call this a heaven. And also, to be clear, if there are native animals to the Beastlands, ones born here naturally, that does mean that when they die, they go to the Beastlands. But wherever they come from, what's unclear to me is whether these true animal petitioners are granted higher intelligence and the ability to speak in their afterlives in 2nd edition, or if it's just the non-true animal petitioners that are, the humanoids and other types that turn into animals after death. For example, I'm not sure if this sentence is referring to all petitioners or just the non-true animal ones. And this book, in the same box set, says that all of the animals of the plane can talk, no matter how intelligent they are. In fact, 2nd edition isn't even consistent on whether there are any native animals at all. It might be the case that every single animal in the plane is a petitioner, of the true animal variety or otherwise. But either way, a difference between the true animal petitioners and the others is that the true animals get sent back to the prime material plane to live again after they die in the Beastlands. In most planes, when a petitioner dies, they're dead for good, so it's more of a second life than a permanent afterlife, though a second life that can be very, very long, as age doesn't kill them. But true animals exist in an endless cycle of reincarnation. At least, if they serve their animal lords well. If they don't, which would presumably mean that they've somehow betrayed their nature, then they really do die for good. That's framed as a sort of punishment for bad behavior, but from a Hindu or Buddhist perspective, that would be the ultimate reward, a release from the never-ending torment of birth, death, and rebirth. Which makes me wonder, does reincarnation mitigate the brutality of the Beastlands? Are the violent and untimely deaths that these animals have to experience made up for by the fact that they don't truly die? Well, for one thing, the pain and suffering are still there. So if not true death, it's still a torture. And for another thing, how much of their lives do they remember? If a lot, then that might make it a bit better, as they would know that this death isn't a true death, and they'll be back for another try. Clearly, the true animals do retain some memories, as they learn to better survive with each cycle, which is actually meant as an in-world explanation, or at least partial explanation, for the instincts of animals. It's the accumulated knowledge of several lifetimes. But petitioners in general don't really keep any of their memories, and if they do, they're very vague and inchoate. For the most part, they just retain their personalities and mannerisms. Which, of course, raises the question of whether a petitioner can really be said to be the same person as they were in life in any real sense. From my perspective, your memories are the connective tissue between your past and present self, and so getting them wiped amounts to the deletion of one person and the creation of another. So what this leads me to believe is that death really would feel final, as you wouldn't really still be you on the other side. Death for the true animals is a memory wipe. They just get better instincts each time. If you think about it, it's like all that remains is the trauma. The vague memory of each death is strong enough to stick, making them better at survival. But that just sounds like a torment to me. You lose all your memories, but what you keep is increasing layers of PTSD. So I don't see how that's any consolation. But even though petitioners make up the vast majority of all the people, or at least creatures in this plane, as they'd have to if every single natural animal in existence goes here after they die, which would be a truly unimaginably monumental amount of beings, there are other groups here as well. In the city of Sigil, which is essentially the hub of the Great Wheel, the melting pot of the Outer Planes, there are 15 factions, at least in 2nd edition, each with their own philosophy, all vying for control over the hearts and minds of the people of the plains. They all keep a headquarters in Sigil, and another one in their plane of primary influence. The faction that resides in the Beastlands is the Sign of One. The Sign of One, also called the Signers, believe that the multiverse exists because the mind imagines it. The Signers, it could be any Signer, create the multiverse through the power of thought, and therefore place themselves at the center of all. Though within their ranks, you might get some diversity of opinion on whether any particular signer believes that they alone think the multiverse into being, that all signers as a collective do it, or that everyone in the multiverse does it, but the signers are just the best at it. And within that, there's the question of whether the power of your imagining is local, where your thoughts are capable of shaping the reality in physical proximity to you, or universal, where your thoughts shape everything, no matter how far. Because sometimes the descriptions of the Sign of One's beliefs match some of these ideas and not others. Sometimes they're presented as people who believe in the law of attraction, that your thoughts can manifest things into reality, and so can the thoughts of others. And in D&D, especially in Planescape, that idea isn't complete nonsense. Belief does legitimately shape reality to some degree in Planescape, so the signers emphasize the power of positive and negative thinking. And to be clear, I do think positive and negative thinking do have some amount of power in real life as well. For instance, if you have an optimistic mindset, you'll be able to more easily shrug off the bad and focus on the good, making it seem as if positivity attracts more positivity, and vice versa for negativity. Or, if you're a happy person, other people will want to spend more time with you than if you're a Debbie Downer. So in that way, positivity really does attract more positivity. But it's all purely psychological, not the mystical, metaphysical, made-up power of the law of attraction. I think because there's some truth in the basic idea, many people believe the rest of it, taking it too far into the realm of delusion. But then, other times, the Sign of One is described essentially in terms of solipsism, that without at least one signer to imagine the multiverse into being, it wouldn't exist at all. But surely not all the signers are imagining the same thing, so why does the multiverse appear the same for everyone? Well, the answer goes, only one signer is real, and everyone else is a product of their imagination. They just can't agree on which one that is. Many signers believe it's themselves, but others content themselves with just knowing that any signer could be the source of everything. Many acknowledge that only one signer is the one, but up until they figure out who it is, they're going to believe it's them. Though some believe that many multiverses exist side by side, one for each individual. But in any case, the Sign of One are quite an open-minded faction. I guess it's easy to be receptive to new ideas when you believe that you were the one who came up with them in the first place. However, the belief that they're the multiverse's chosen, that they've imagined things into being, or that they have the ability to imagine things out of being, results in them being a rather self-centered faction, as they often have difficulty acknowledging others as fully real. There is, though, the ever-present danger for signers that they doubt their own genuine existence and believe themselves to be imaginary, or that they imagine too well a multiverse without them in it, making them cease to exist. The Sign of One's headquarters in Sigil is the Hall of Speakers in the Clerk's Ward, where they act as legislators and mediators in debates, though all factions have a vote in new legislature. Their base on the Beastlands is a manor within the town of Signpost known as Dreamhearth. They've chosen this plane, for one thing, because at some time in the past, a portal to the Beastlands appeared in their Hall of Speakers, and has been there ever since. And for another thing, because for many speakers, animals represent an ideal, a singularity of vision, the idea that the multiverse exists only in the ways that impact the animal, which reflects their concept of focusing on the things that affect their own lives. Also, the Sign of One doesn't actively recruit people. Instead, others need to prove that they can alter the multiverse in order to join. So the Beastlands, a realm without many potential recruits, suits them just fine. The leader, or Factol, of the Sign of One is a human female diviner named Darius, who they say achieved her position merely by envisioning herself there. She's actually less self-centered than most signers, and her current goals are to enhance the empathic abilities of the faction's members and spread the Sign of One's tolerance for diversity throughout the rest of society. The Sign of One is also currently concocting a plan to prove their control over the multiverse by resurrecting a dead god through the power of collective thought. But the Sign of One isn't the only group active in the Beastlands. There's also the Verdant Guild, which isn't a faction, but a sect. Sects are like factions, but smaller scale and don't hold power within Sigil. The Verdant Guild, also called the Wilders, are a sect dedicated to protecting the Beastlands, and all wildlife and natural places in general, from depredation and destruction. They're essentially conservationists, environmentalists, or ecocentrists, preserving the wilderness from the callous and ecologically destructive spread of civilization. Though they don't hate civilization or technology. They just oppose its growth when it comes at the expense of nature. They see it as a balancing act. Without the resources of nature, civilization is doomed. But civilization often forgets that fact, and so the Verdant Guild must step in. The Wilders' primary focus is the Beastlands, as it's the epitome of all nature, but they can also be found throughout all the upper planes, and sometimes in other planes as well, as they do monitor the happenings of the Blood War in order to prevent or mitigate any ecological damage that eternal war between demons and devils can cause when it occasionally spills out into other planes. The Verdant Guild's symbol is Yggdrasil, which the sect frequently uses as a means of travel, with a mask in front. Each member of the guild wears a mask of an animal of their choosing, which allows them to speak with that kind of animal. The Verdant Guild's members are largely rangers, druids, and the animal petitioners of the Beastlands. Their leader is a male human named Aranatok. It's not outright stated, so I'm reading between the lines slightly here, but he comes from the prime material world of Athas, of the Dark Sun campaign setting. It's a world without gods, where the only way to use wizardly magic is by ripping out the life force of nature, leaving it dead and ashen. Within Athas, there are wizards who try to use magic wisely, and they're known as the Preservers, taking only what's sustainable from the land. But because that's a path that is very slow to make progress in and grants less power, they're vastly outnumbered by the Defilers, wizards who wield magic with no concern for the environment. And so the world of Athas is mostly a barren wasteland, brought to ruin by the reckless use of magic. Seeing from experience what a destroyed ecosystem can do to a world, he's made it his mission to prevent that fate befalling anywhere else. There's also another sect. Not based in the Beastlands, but are so intertwined with it that they deserve to be talked about here. And that's the Vile Hunt, the mortal enemies of the Verdant Guild. The Vile Hunt's whole existence is centered around exterminating the animal petitioners of the Beastlands. For whatever reason, they consider animals with the minds of men to be abominations. They can't stand the idea that a beast might be smarter than they are. So, I suppose if the true animal petitioners of the Beastlands don't have enhanced intelligence or the ability to speak, which I think is unclear, then the Vile Hunt wouldn't have a problem with them. It's just the regular mortals who have turned into animals after death that they have beef with. Though you'd also think they'd have beef with the animals of Bitopia, as those are intelligent too. However, in 5th edition, the Vile Hunt are pretty much just poachers, and hunt regular animals as well as sapient ones for sport. They've established themselves in and around the Beastlands' gate town of Faunel for easy access to the plane. In 2nd edition, there's a whole adventure book where the Vile Hunt is rather relevant, called Something Wild, in which the followers of Malar, the evil god of the hunt, are attempting to free him from his prison in Carcery and set him loose on the Beastlands, corrupting the plane in the process, making the creatures there more aggressive and evil, and making the people turn into animals, including the members of the Vile Hunt, which is the worst possible fate they could imagine. There's also a short adventure in this book where the Vile Hunt have teamed up with devils to capture some of the dangerous beasts of the realm and unleash them in the Blood War to wreak havoc upon the demons. As you know well by now, animals of all sorts live here. If they can be found in nature in the prime material plane, they can be found here, excluding a few types of creatures who are deemed too unnatural for whatever reason, such as dragons. Essentially, if an animal can be found in the real world, it can be found in the Beastlands, plus a few other more fantastical types of creatures. And there are giant versions of all these beasts as well, which can be petitioners. Why some petitioners end up as giant animals and others don't, who's to say? But perhaps it's like a bonus reward for those who are really in tune with nature and life. The plane is also home to semi-beasts, such as centaurs, wemmicks, which are like centaurs but half lion instead of horse, beastmen, lizardmen, good-aligned werewolves, swanmays, which are like were-swans, alagi, which are like non-evil yetis, winged elves, and more. And then, of course, as I mentioned in the last section, there's also non-beasts, like humans. Though they're more often than not visitors to the plane who have taken a liking to it and decided to stay, rather than natives. There are also the types of beings who can be found throughout all of the upper planes, such as celestials like Haliphants, Asamin, and Fu creatures. But there are a few types of creatures native to this plane that I'd like to pay special attention to, and those are Gaspars, A-serpents, Dread Blossoms, Warden Beasts, Animal Lords, Mortai, and Zapyops. Gaspars are basically giant deer, but with antlers coming out of their shoulders and hips as well as their heads. They're typically peaceful herd animals, but are extremely dangerous when provoked, and have the ability to cast plane shift on attackers, sending them to a random plane. A-serpents, also known as dark strikes or death strikes, are gigantic snakes with scales as black as night, and a sheen that makes them appear slimy, even though they're dry to the touch. They like to hide in darkness, where only their thin yellow eyes can be seen. Because they prefer nighttime, they're primarily found in Karasuthra, the 3rd layer, but they can rarely be found in the darkest forested regions of Brux or even Krigala, where the sun doesn't penetrate the canopy. There's a common in-world misconception that A-serpents are vampiric, when in reality they just have a unique venom. If you get bitten by a dark strike, and you fail your saving throw to resist the poison, your body's metabolism is instantly altered such that your flesh begins to consume your own blood for sustenance. You'll then die after a few minutes of excruciating pain. Though, if you're intelligent enough, you may be able to realize what's happening to you, and that consuming the blood of others will allow you to live a little longer. Thus, the misconception of vampirism. You can be cured through magic, like the Cure Wounds spell, but of course, you don't have long to do so without either dying or being forced to drink blood for your supply of oxygen, water, and nutrients. Also, if you get bitten, you've still got the A-serpent itself to worry about. It's not like they just leave you alone. In fact, once you get poisoned, they'll try to swallow you whole, as they're unable to digest unpoisoned victims. And once you've been swallowed, you'll die twice as quickly. Some theorize that the A-serpents were originally from the Abyss, or some other lower plane. But despite their fearsomeness and their terrible venom, they're not evil. Others think that they were originally from the prime material plane, but were hunted to extinction, leaving specimens only in the Beastlands. Which raises the question, if true animal petitioners normally go back to the prime material plane when they die, what happens when that kind of animal is extinct in the material plane? I've got to imagine that the souls of animals enter the body of some prime material animal being born. So if there are no bodies to enter, where do they go? Do they just die for good? That certainly adds back in any of the harshness that was removed from death due to reincarnation. Creature might not be the right word to describe dread blossoms, because they're plants. But there are intelligent plant creatures in D&D, such as treants or woodwoads. It's just that dread blossoms have no intelligence score, so they really are just plants. Still, they do behave as if they were thinking beings. Dread blossoms are long-stemmed, red flowers speckled with gold and black that give off a sweet smell in an attempt to mask the underlying smell of decay as they plant themselves in corpses. When someone comes close, and those who are unfamiliar with dread blossoms often do because they make for an unusual sight, they launch themselves into the air and flutter their petals to fly like a flock of birds toward their next victim. Their roots end in sharp, hollow thorns that they use to puncture the skin and drain their victim's blood. And even worse, they exude a cloud of paralyzing pollen within 15 feet, so you may not even get the chance to run. But the creatures of the Beastlands know not to disturb beds of dread blossoms. Warden beasts are powerful, spiritual representations of the various animal groups of the Beastlands, serving as leaders and champions. Each warden beast holds dominion over one group of animals, such as bears, wolves, deer, and so on. What's strange to me is that there's warden beasts for insects, lizards, and birds, but those groups are way more general than bears, wolves, and deer. Why would mammals have unique warden beasts on the level of family, but for birds it's just one type of warden beast for the entire class? There's way more diversity in birds than in mammals. They have roughly double the amount of species, and it's way more extreme for insects. There's like 150 times as many species of insects as there are mammals. And there's not even consistency within the mammals, because while deer and bears are both families, wolves aren't even a genus. I guess the writers of Planescape didn't like biology. And that's not even considering the fact that the Beastlands is potentially home to extinct animals too, which would actually make taxonomizing these animals much harder, if not impossible, as you'd have a continuous string of every kind of animal that's ever lived. At least until they go extinct in the Beastlands, too. And so it would be much harder to find dividing lines between animals to sort them into neat little groups. After all, if you arranged all the intermediates between an animal of one species and its ancestor from a different species, could you point to a specific spot where the species has changed? No, at least for the most part. Speciation normally occurs over many generations, but sometimes it can happen rapidly. Anyway, however these groups are divided, by species, by genus, by family, by whole class, or some nonsensical random mix of all of these, each warden beast watches over one group. But there are many warden beasts for each group. They look like the animals that they guard and master, the epitome of that type of animal, appearing as a larger, perfect specimen. Like the animal petitioners, they are intelligent and can speak, and you can even sense that intelligence, and thus tell them apart from regular animals just by looking into their eyes. But they aren't petitioners. They're more like manifestations of the plane itself. If the regular animals are on one end of a spectrum, and the animal lords, that I'll describe next, are on the other, then warden beasts are somewhere in the middle. Despite being intelligent creatures who live in a good plane, warden beasts are neutral. They aren't concerned with the greater good and act mostly just like the animals they represent, unless there's some threat to their kind, in which case they can cast spells. They also are in tune with the land around them, such that if any major event happens within 5 miles, they'll be aware of it. Perhaps not in specifics, but on a basic level, and they can contact all the animals within 5 miles to warn them, also on a basic level. For instance, they can influence other animals to flee, swarm, or calm down. Warden beasts are biologically immortal, so they don't age and only die if slain. They can mate with other animals, or even animal lords, and the resulting children are always more warden beasts. Animal lords are similar in many ways to the warden beasts, except they are the ultimate paragons of their animal type, and there is only ever one lord per type. But there are at least hundreds of types, and so hundreds of animal lords. The primary examples include the cat lord, the hawk lord, the lizard lord, and the wolf lord. Animal lords look like exemplars of their animal group in much the same way that warden beasts do, except that they also have a humanoid form they can adopt when dealing with non-beasts. though their humanoid forms always take some of the characteristics of the animal they rule over. In 5.5e, animal lords have 3 forms. Their animal form is that of a giant version of their animal type with glowing eyes, and they still have the humanoid form with subtle, animal-like features. But the form they spend perhaps the most time in are hybrid forms. I do personally like this a bit better, as these look more animalistic. But I actually think they shouldn't even have humanoid forms at all. I mean, they're animal lords. Why would they want to look like anything other than their animal? But their humanoid forms are seen differently by different people, according to the person's disposition toward the animal they represent. For instance, to cat lovers, the cat lord appears extremely attractive and charismatic, whereas to cat haters, she has a much lower charisma score and seems repulsive and intimidating. Animal lords hold a godlike status in the Beastlands. They're quasi-deities, basically. They have immense power, and they have petitioners and realms, and in a way, they're immortal, but only kind of. Animal lords can be killed, but they're manifestations of the plane itself, so when one dies, a new one will rise to take its place, its essence reappearing in an animal of that type somewhere in the multiverse. The animal lords are basically gods to their respective animals, and may be why animals from the prime material plane become petitioners in death, because they each worship an animal lord, if not consciously, then perhaps innately. It's said that the animal lords know the moods of every single one of their animals across the planes. Animal lords also have natural telepathy that's just always on, making them impossible to surprise or deceive, and they also have a keen danger sense that borders on precognition. Like the warden beasts, the animal lords are neutral, caring little for anything but matters directly related to them and the group of animal they watch over. Which, again, raises the question, if the animal lords are neutral, and the warden beasts are neutral, and the animals are neutral, or at least unaligned, even the intelligent ones, and at this point we're talking like 90% of all the inhabitants of the Beastlands, why exactly are the Beastlands good and not neutral? And also, if the non-true animal petitioners are neutral, why would a good mortal become a neutral petitioner when they die? Who knows, but a type of creature in the Beastlands that actually is good for once are the Mortai. Mortai are enigmatic creatures of immense intelligence and power, actually more powerful than the animal lords. They're godlike beings of the air, also known as the faces in the clouds, as they appear as great clouds spanning the horizon, miles and miles long, floating thousands of feet in the air. If they want to remain unnoticed, they can imitate a natural cloud perfectly. But if they want to reveal themselves, they'll pulsate with a golden glow, and faces of wisdom and beauty will appear on the cloud's surface. However, they normally don't interfere with the lives of mortals, and don't initiate contact with them. But they do know all languages, and are often glad to help people out with just about any problem they might bring before them, if they ask nicely, though they specialize in matters of philosophy. Sometimes they'll give answers or advice in the form of riddles or half-answers, but they only do this when the full or straightforward answer would do less good than learning some of it yourself. And they can be quite the pranksters. For instance, if you're rude to them, they might create a personal rain cloud to follow you around for a few days. Mortai are generally pacifistic creatures, and will just fly away if people try to fight them. Not that anyone would stand much of a chance anyway. The range alone is enough to ensure you can't even hit them from the ground, not to mention their speed and their immunity to all weapons. Though if you really do want to kill one, they have a secret core hidden somewhere in all that cloud that can be damaged by magic weapons. You've just gotta be able to withstand constant lightning bolts and be able to fly, which is a much harder feat in the Beastlands than most other places. And that's because the Mortai actually prevent all flight that isn't natural throughout the entire plane. So pretty much the only way to fly is by having wings, or getting carried by something that does. The Mortai also have perfect control of the atmosphere, though the chaotic weather of the Beastlands isn't usually their doing. That's just how it is here. But they could change it if they wanted to. There are 3 main theories about what the Mortai actually are. The first is that they're just manifestations of the Beastlands, a sentient life force of the entire plane. kind of like the warden beasts in Animal Lords. The second is that they're demigods of the air. And the third theory, that the people of the Outer Planes seem to think is most likely, is that they're collections of slightly chaotic good spirits, which I guess would make them petitioners, just perhaps conglomerations of petitioners. They could be the next stage of petitionerhood in the Beastlands. Excluding the true animals that get reincarnated, when a petitioner dies in their home plane, their essence merges with the plane, adding to and strengthening its fabric. Perhaps in the Beastlands, when a petitioner dies, their essences merge with others to become mortai. And if that was the case, I suppose that would soften the brunt of death by predation a bit. Zapyops are one of the several types of energons, incorporeal jellyfish-like creatures that embody different kinds of energy. The most well-known ones are the Zagya of the positive energy plane and the Zegyi of the negative energy plane. Other types of energons can be found in other planes, such as the Zakyels of Gehenna, the Zakyizhes of Limbo, the Zongyongs of Acheron, and the Zoryosts of Beator. Energons are attracted to great releases of energy, congregating at scenes of natural or unnatural cataclysms, and sometimes peacefully following spellcasters around after witnessing them cast a powerful spell. They have no ability to naturally travel between planes, but they have a great curiosity for gates and portals, and enter them whenever they find them, and so they can be found in almost any plane, though rarely. Zapyops are the energons of electricity, and can most often be found in the Beastlands, though I would have to assume that the quasi-elemental plane of lightning is home to even more of them. But perhaps the Beastlands is appealing to them due to the chaotic nature of the weather, and maybe also the presence of the mortai. Those who travel the planes without coming prepared will make the unfortunate discovery that magic works differently than they're used to back home. In Planescape, there are 10 schools of magic: abjuration, alteration, conjuration, divination, enchantment, illusion, evocation, necromancy, wild magic, and elemental magic. Each of the planes affect these schools differently. Sometimes they're enhanced, sometimes they're diminished or even entirely negated, sometimes they're altered, and sometimes they're completely unaffected. In the Beastlands, the schools of alteration, conjuration, divination, enchantment, necromancy, and elemental magic are affected. As I mentioned a moment ago, the mortai prevent all unnatural flight in this plane, such that only creatures who can normally fly are capable of getting off the ground. This means that spells that allow you to fly, such as fly, don't work here. This also extends to any alteration spells that manipulate the wind, air, or weather, such as Featherfall, Gust of Wind, Windwall, Control Weather, and so on. Conjuration is affected in all of the outer planes in the same way at a baseline. Since the inner planes are the elemental planes, and they're not directly connected to the outer planes, at least in theory, elementals can't be summoned here. Instead, pseudo-elementals are summoned in their place, as long as you have a spell key. A change that's specific to the Beastlands is that all monster summoning spells only draw upon creatures native to the plane. In AD&D 2nd edition, there were spells called Monster Summoning 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 7, that could summon a wide variety of monsters to fight alongside you. In 3rd edition, these spells still exist, but they're called Summon Monster rather than Monster Summoning. In 5th edition, these spells don't exist, but instead have basically been broken up into their component parts, such as Summon Elemental, Summon Celestial, Summon Beast, and so on. So in the Beastlands, the only ones that would function are Summon Beasts and Summon Celestial, and the Celestials that you could get would be reduced to just those living in this plane already. Another difference with these summoning spells is that while beasts will answer your magical call, they're under no compulsion to actually serve you. They'll just show up and act like beasts normally would. Similarly, divination spells in the Beastlands that call upon knowledge or beings from other planes also don't work here. For instance, the spell Contact Other Plane. This is nature's plane, and as such, unnatural resources have no place here. Enchantment spells are restricted in the Beastlands in that attempts to control or charm just don't work on the animals of the plane, as even the normal animals really aren't normal. They're just too wild. So spells like Animal Friendship, Animal Messenger, Charm Monster, Suggestion, and so on don't work. But of course, since many of the animals are intelligent and can speak, you could just try asking them for whatever it is you want. Since this is a plane of abundant life, all harmful necromancy spells, such as Chill Touch or Inflict Wounds, are cast as if the spellcaster is one level lower than they actually are, which would mean that if you're 5th level and normally have access to 3rd level spells, you can't use them here, at least the ones from the necromancy school that cause harm. And also, any level-based effects are scaled down because of this. For instance, in 2nd edition, Chill Touch lasts an extra round for every level you have. In 5th edition, I feel like there's a lot less of this, if any at all, and it's more about upcasting spells using higher level spell slots for more damage or whatever. So I think in the Beastlands it would make sense to have to downcast your spells, in a sense, still using the same level spell slot, but decreasing the effect rather than increasing it. For example, Inflict Wounds does 1d10 more damage for each spell slot level above 1st level that you use on it. So here, perhaps you would subtract 1d10 from the baseline power of the spell. Elemental magic is altered in the Beastlands due to its strong primal nature. Fire spells are enhanced in Krigala due to the constant burning presence of Solera, the sun, and are diminished in Karasuthra, as Noctos, the moon, draws the sun's heat away. Water spells are enhanced nearby the Beastlands' large bodies of water, and earth spells are enhanced near mountains and large rocky outcroppings. But as with alteration, all spells of elemental air automatically fail, at least without a spell key. Also note that for any spells in other schools that also deal with air, wind, or weather, they'll fail as well. If you want to avoid all of these magical complications and get your spells working normally, it requires spell keys. The keys of each plane are different, and they're often also different depending on the spell school and sometimes also the layer of the plane or the power of the spell, or even the particular spell being cast. Spell keys can be physical objects, or they can be actions or words or thoughts. In the Beastlands, spell keys take the form of natural items, and in general, the larger the item, the higher level spell the key empowers. Examples of common keys, but of course there could very well be other ones, it's just up to the DM what they are, include Blown Leaves for alteration, food for the type of creature being summoned, or a large quantity of the element in question for a pseudo-elemental for conjuration, silver ore for divination, crystals or geodes for enchantment, bone from the creature you wish to affect for necromancy, and naturally created effects of the proper element for elemental magic, such as smoke from a fire for elemental air. Since a lot of these things are easier to procure than the typical spell key, remember that the challenge of spell keys isn't always in obtaining them, but also in learning what they are in the first place, and in having enough of them. For instance, if you wanted to cast Fly successfully, it would require a lot of smoke. And spellcasters can learn what specific spell keys are either through attunement with the plane itself, like by spending time here and coming to understand its nature, or through seeking out the information from other characters, perhaps for a price. So, how does one actually get to the Beastlands? Well, it depends on where you're starting. From the prime material plane, it can be quite challenging, unless you happen to have access to high-level magic. Plane shift, gate, and astral projection can get you there easily enough, though of all those, astral projection will be more of a journey, as you still have to venture through the astral plane until you find a color pool that will take you to the Beastlands, which are the emerald ones, and you'll also leave your body behind. In 5th edition, when your astral form leaves the astral plane, your body will zip along for the ride to whatever plane you entered. But in 1st edition AD&D, your real body is still left behind, and when your astral form enters a new plane, you materialize a new body from whatever materials are at hand. And if that's a relatively normal environment, you'll get a normal body. But if not, some funky stuff can happen. For instance, if you get deposited into a pool of magma, you'll get a body of magma. If you don't have access to these spells, it's possible you can find some magic item that'll get you there, like a cubic gate, though they're legendary wondrous items, so they're pretty rare. You might also just stumble through a conduit and wind up here by mistake. It's also quite rare, but conduits are basically wormholes that connect the planes in natural places that reflect the nature of the plane they lead to. For the Beastlands, you might be able to find a conduit in places of pristine and untouched wilderness, far away from civilization, like deep in a jungle or in the middle of some giant savanna. If you're coming from elsewhere in the Outer Planes, things get a bit easier. You can find portals in Sigil that'll take you to really any plane. It's called the City of Doors for a reason. The best known portal to the Beastlands in Sigil is the one controlled by the Sign of One in the Hall of Speakers. And since the Hall of Speakers is more open to the public than most faction headquarters, you might have an easier time using their portal compared to the other faction portals. I also seem to remember there being a portal to the Beastlands somewhere in the Market Ward, but I can't remember where I read that, or if I'm just hallucinating it. You can also get there through portals from the Beastlands' neighboring planes, which are Elysium, Arborea, and the Outlands. On the Beastlands side, portals to these planes usually appear as large openings in hollow trees. They can be any type of tree, but the same tree type always leads to the same plane. Neighboring planes are the most well-connected, which is why they're neighboring, because of course they're not actually physically next to each other. They're just imagined like this due to the strength or frequency of the magical connections between them. So you can theoretically find portals from any plane leading to the Beastlands. They're just much more rare. For instance, there's a portal in Malar the Beast Lord's prison realm in Carcery that leads here. And there's said to be a portal deep in the mountains of Krigala that leads to Isgard. Plus, there's the interplanar pathways, which are mystical connections between the planes. There's the River Oceanus, whose pure waters connect some of the upper planes, the River Styx, whose foul currents connect all of the lower planes, Mount Olympus, whose caves and mountainsides connect all the planes where the Greek pantheon has influence, Yggdrasil, whose branches and roots do the same for the Norse pantheon, and the Infinite Staircase, whose winding paths reach all of the outer planes. Of all these, the only ones that don't reach the Beastlands are Mount Olympus and the River Styx. Oceanus flows straight through the first layer of Krigala, dividing it in half, and the roots and branches of Yggdrasil connect all of the layers, even though there are no Norse gods to be found in this plane. Many suspect that Yggdrasil is drawn here due to the plane's unfettered wildness and abundance of life. The limbs of Yggdrasil can often be hard to reach in the Beastlands, though, often requiring climbing high into the mountains to secluded forests. The most common way for most creatures to get to the Beastlands is through becoming petitioners after death. If you had a patron deity who resides in the Beastlands, you'd go to their realm in death, where you'd take the form of their choosing. Most petitioners of the Beastlands take on the forms of animals, of course, but your god might prefer other forms. But if you didn't have a patron deity, then your afterlife is determined based on your alignment. If you were neutral good, but not really chaotic, you'd go to Elysium. If you were chaotic good, you'd go to Arborea. And if you were right in between, that sweet spot of neutral chaotic good, you'd go to the Beastlands. Though if you were neutral chaotic good, but only very weakly and were overall just true neutral, then you'd go to the Outlands. Though perhaps the most reliable way to get here, or at least the most well-known, is the portal in the Beastlands Gate Town. The Outlands, the plane of true neutrality, has 16 gate towns, one for each of the other outer planes. They're called gate towns because they're each home to a permanent, stable gate leading to their respective plane. Each gate town is like a microcosm of the plane it leads to, although not a perfect one. There's usually a difference between the town and the plane, and if there isn't, that gate town isn't going to remain in the Outlands for long. Because if a place somewhere in the outer planes embodies the nature of somewhere else in the outer planes better, it'll move there, which is called cosmic realignment. The gate town to the Beastlands is called Faunel, or Faunel. I'm not actually sure how it should be pronounced, but I'll go with Faunel. At first glance, the town might not seem like a town at all, and rather just a dense forest. But get closer and you'll notice a vast amount of stone ruins and multicolored tents, everything covered in vines and vegetation. There's broken and crumbling buildings, cracked fountains spilling water, and cathedrals split in half by trees. It's a town overtaken by nature, inhabited by plenty of animals, as well as humanoids and other planers. A broken city full of life. Some residents do use the old stones to build their houses, but most just live outdoors or use a tent. And each of the tents has a unique color and pattern combination, so it's easy enough to find someone's house if you know what color it is, though navigating the town's overgrowth to actually get there isn't so easy. The air here is always hot and wet, with heavy downpours that seem to come out of nowhere. You might think, what with all the ruins, that this place was once a great city of some kind, but legends say that these ruins actually come from prime material worlds. Whenever a city somewhere out in the material plane gets abandoned, a chunk of it falls into the Outlands. This might not actually be true, but there's talk of gates to prime worlds hidden in the town's debris, too. And if that's true, perhaps the other part is too. A lot of planers call Faunel the wreckage because of all the ruins, and more are discovered all the time, though it's pretty much impossible to know which have been there all along, just buried beneath the vines, and which, if any, have come from prime material worlds. Most of Faunel's citizens are intelligent animal petitioners from the Beastlands, plus some elves, humans, Barriar, halflings, and Kender, which are basically elf-like halflings from the prime material world of Kryn. Perhaps unsurprisingly, it's one of the least populated gate towns, with about 900 human citizens and twice as many animal ones. Unlike most other gate towns, there is no official ruler of Faunel. The only law here is the law of the jungle, though there is one prominent figure in town who's sometimes seen as the de facto ruler, and that's Wrath, the large stone statue who guards the gate to the Beastlands. But he only involves himself in the affairs of town when he thinks that the town's safety or that of the Beastlands is at stake. Some say that Wrath was once a mortal, a creature made of living cloud, who rebelled against his kind and turned to stone, perhaps as a punishment for that rebellion, or perhaps that itself was the rebellion. No one knows, as Wrath is very secretive about his past. But now he's a monolith with a human face and glowing blue eyes. Some say that he's the only thing keeping Faunel from cosmic realignment, but something else that might be keeping Faunel in the Outlands is the presence of the Vile Hunt, who operate nearby. Of course, their plan is to take out all of the animal petitioners that live here, but they'd like to kill Wrath too, as he's preventing them from having easy access to the Beastlands. Since Faunel is mostly ruins and plants, there aren't many locations of note here, but there are two. First, perhaps the most popular inn in town, is a massive sky blue tent known as the Badger Hole Tavern. The second is the sign of one's headquarters in town. It's a burned-out, roofless cathedral with broken stained glass windows covered in tarps called the Center of Eternal Dreams. But that's all 2nd edition. There are also some details about the town from 5th edition, some of which differ. In 5th edition, the ruins are those of Old Faunel. You see, the gate town was so alike to the Beastlands that it got absorbed by it, cosmically realigned. But the Beastlands rejected the buildings, claiming only the inhabitants. The jungle overtook the city, and then the town was re-established by newcomers and sapient animals who were away when their home disappeared. It's possible this has happened countless times, and the stone ruins are the structures left behind from the very first iteration of the town, rejected by the Beastlands every time for being too artificial. Now, as the beasts are still returning to Faunel, there are 3 factions vying for control of the animal kingdom. There's the Predators, led by a saber-toothed tiger named Ebenclaw, the Herbivores, led by an elephant named Ophelia, and the Flyers, led by an albatross named Parvaz. And those aren't official faction names or anything, by the way. They're just descriptors of the type of creatures in each group. And then there's also Mick Mangehide, the Null leader of the Vile Hunt in 5th edition, who's made it his goal to slay the other leaders and claim Faunel as his own hunting ground. The town composition is the same in 5th edition, mostly beasts with some non-beasts as well. But 5th edition adds some other places of interest. Camp Greenbrier is a collection of tents, huts, and mud-soaked caravans surrounded by a spiked wooden palisade in a clearing. It's a popular place for explorers and hunters to gather supplies and trade before heading deeper into the forests. Heart Delta is where the Herbivore faction can be found. It's an expanse of high grasses and trees permeated by sleepy rivers a few miles from Camp Greenbrier. Ophelia the elephant holds court in a crater at the center of the delta called the Hollow. Razortooth Rock is home to Ebenclaw's faction. It's a pointed stone overlook that resembles the fangs of the predators who live there, amidst an arid region of rugged cliffs and rock formations. Eagle's Eyrie is a forest of exceptionally tall golden trees, where birds and other flyers reside in rickety tree houses and intricate nests. There's a petrified, leafless tree deep in Eagle's Eyrie called the Watcher's Talon that Parvaz the Albatross uses as a meeting place for his faction. And of course, there's the Gate. In both 2nd and 5th edition, it's a tranquil pool guarded by Wrath. But in 5th edition, the pool grants intelligence and the ability to speak to any animal that drinks from its waters, and trees whose roots absorb its waters become treants. So I guess then in 5th edition, the citizens of Faunel aren't necessarily even petitioners of the Beastlands. Some of them might still be, but many of them could just be the regular animals of the Outlands who drank from the waters and gained sapience. You'd think that would make this the Vile Hunt's primary target for destruction, but in 5th edition, the Vile Hunt have been changed to just be trophy hunters, with no particular vendetta against intelligent animals, so I guess not. But to enter the Beastlands, all you have to do is submerge yourself in the pool's waters. However, Wrath questions all those who wish to do so, asking what business they have in the Beastlands. In 5th edition, he has a disdain for any who hunt for sport rather than sustenance, and ensures that they do not pass, violently if necessary. In 2nd edition, he may refuse admittance to any on evil business, or those who simply ignore him or lie to him, or he may let them pass. You see, Wrath seems to have the ability to affect where the gate takes a person. And so those who disrespect him, or the Beastlands itself, have a way of meeting quick and messy ends on the other side of the gate. Krigala, the first layer of the Beastlands, is the layer of eternal noon. Celera, the sun, rules this layer, and remains at its zenith no matter where you go in the layer, its heat beating down constantly. So, overall, it's a rather hot layer, the sun baking and scorching the earth in deserts and savannas, though there are many places where the light barely penetrates the thick canopy of dense rainforests and jungles. But like every layer of the Beastlands, there are all types of natural terrain, such as coniferous forests, arctic tundras, and glaciers, so the warmth of the sun can vary sharply from region to region. But in general, temperature decreases as altitude increases. Since plants in most prime-material worlds are used to getting 12 hours of sunlight or less, but there's never-ending light in Krigala, the trees and other plants grow to immense proportions here. Krigala is divided almost perfectly in two by Oceanus, the great transplanar river flowing from Elysium on its way to Arborea. The sweet-smelling Oceanus is the center of all life on Krigala, where uncounted animals come to feed, drink, and hunt. The forests and swamps are thickest near the broad banks of the river, and this is where the wildlife is the most luxuriant. Oceanus is a popular way to travel through the layer, as it provides safety from the land-dwelling predators, though there are still the water-dwelling and airborne predators to worry about. The creatures that live in Krigala are all diurnal, or those that are active during the daytime in normal environments with an actual day-night cycle. There are many one-way portals that connect the layers, usually hardly even noticeable, or not noticeable at all until you've already passed through them. The creatures of Krigala know well how the portals between layers work, and can instinctively avoid them or seek them out, depending on their needs. I do wonder whether the animals of Krigala have just adapted, whether magically or otherwise, to just always be active without the need for sleep, or if they do sleep and have just learned to deal with the never-ending brightness, or if they seek out dark places such as dense forests or underground burrows when it's time to rest, or if they change layers to suit their cycle of activity. That last one seems like it would be pretty cool, but from the descriptions available, it doesn't seem like it's the case. For the most part, I think the animals of each layer stick to that layer. Krigala has a few noteworthy locations to talk about. Most of them are the realms of the gods, but a handful aren't. The Beastlands is nature's plane, and as such, there is little that you would think of as civilization, and towns are few and far between, but there nonetheless are a couple of them. Perhaps the most important town in Krigala is called Signpost. This is the headquarters of the Sign of One on this plane. It's a frontier town, and almost as wild as the rest of the layer, with a rough-hewn wooden palisade and a few dozen buildings, looking more like a small fort than a proper town. Still, it's just about the only place in the Beastlands where you can find metal weapons for sale, and if you're looking for an actual bed and a hot meal, Signpost is one of your only options. Since it's one of the few settlements in the whole plane, most of the plane's news finds its way through Signpost at some point, so it's a good place to look for information as well. The town consists mostly of signers and part-animal humanoids, such as Wemmicks, lizardmen, swanmays, aarakocra, saurials, and some non-evil bullywugs. The Sign of One have a huge stone manor here named Dreamhearth, where signers from Sigil often visit as a retreat to refine their meditations, boosted by the primal forces of the Beastlands. This is also where a lot of the imagining is being done in their plot to bring a dead god back to life. And it's also the location of another signer experiment called the Dreamlink, where the signers have been attempting to dream their way into contact with the essence of the Beastlands itself. In the Something Wild adventure, a Githzerai signer known as the One succeeds at this, but followers of Malar the Beastlord find out about it and lock his dreaming mind into a nightmare dreamscape while he's still communing with the Beastlands, tainting the plane, at least until the villains are stopped. The local leader of the Sign of One is a tiefling named Saraz. She runs the Dreamhearth and is the town's unofficial mayor, but the Sign of One don't have much interest in ruling the place. They're too caught up in their own introspections for that, and just leave the rest of the town to run itself. Signpost is described as being near the border between Krigala and Brux, leaving me a bit confused how these layers are meant to be arranged, and what the nature of their physical relationship is, and to what extent it's literal versus metaphorical. But apparently, the layers are separated by thousands of feet of cliffs with narrow switchback trails. So in this description, they're the same landmass, just at different elevations. It's probably best to just not think about it too hard. But anyway, due to the fact that Signpost exists on the very edge of Krigala, the town is caught between daylight and twilight, constantly suffused in a ruddy 3/4 light. Some people travel all the way here just for the view. Tribrove is another town in this layer, though it doesn't stay in the same place. It's a mobile town, a tribe of nomadic Wemmicks following herds of antelope and bison across the plains of Krigala. They believe that the plane itself is alive, and worship it as their chosen deity. The tribe is made up of about 600 citizens, and many of their warriors are members of the Verdant Guild, who keep watch for intruders and dangerous outsiders on their travels. They're particularly wary of mages and those who appear obviously supernatural, such as tieflings. But those who have been determined by the Council of Elders to be non-evil are allowed to travel alongside them. Triberove's ruler and eldest warrior is known as Chief Thunderclaw, and the Council of Elders is made up of the leaders of the town's 20 prides. Illifar in the Wind is a city of Avarials, also known as Winged Elves, though their name for themselves is the Al-Karak Alam. It's a city in the trees that is far larger than it appears from the ground. An open-air plaza of wood and marble is nestled in the center of town, with buildings, perches, and ledges jutting out at all heights from the many branches. The city is incredibly beautiful, and the structures somehow look as if the chaotic tangle of trees they were built around grew with them in mind. Illifar in the Wind is ruled by an Avarial named Prince Alarian, who forbids all weaponry and fire-making materials from entering the city. Another site in Krigala is the Standing Stones, seemingly a shrine to some unknown god of nature. The site consists of 3 concentric rings of stones atop the tallest hill in a rough scrubland region of the layer, but many of the stones have fallen and rolled down to the base of the hill over the years. The hill is steep enough that there's only a single narrow path up to the top. To the east and north, there's more scrubland with herds of grazing animals. To the west is a large deciduous forest inhabited by dryads. To the south is an area of low-lying, dusty hills, and a cold stream that runs from the forest into a lake of even colder water. A member of the Verdant Guild, called the Warden, oversees this whole area. He's a tiefling with stag's antlers and a deer mask. He lives in harmony with the surrounding environment, and has expertly trained dogs and falcons that he uses to hunt down any who kill animals for sport. Though he doesn't believe in killing people, he just wants to give them a taste of what it's like to be hunted, and to get them the hell out of the Beastlands. The only spot safe from the Warden is the top of the hill, in the middle of the standing stones, and this is exactly where he chases people to, or drags their unconscious bodies. You see, the standing stones act as a one-way gate to Sigil, so once his quarry have been chased up here, he instructs them how to use the gate. The gate key is to sprinkle some water on the central offering stone while speaking the name of the City of Doors. The Warden also might write a note that acts as a key. What most people don't know is that the standing stones were originally built to honor the Fey gods of the Seelie Court, who frequently visit the Beastlands. Offerings used to be made to them here, but for whatever reason, the practice declined, and so the standing stones fell into disrepair. But it's said that with the proper sacrificial items, you can use the Circle of Stones as a gate to the first layer of Arborea. The difficulty is figuring out what offering the notoriously fickle Seelie Court might like on any given day. The Deeping Pool is a small lake, about a quarter-mile wide and several miles long, hidden within a broadleaf forest whose thick canopy casts the undergrowth in a twilight gloom. The Deeping Pool is the only noteworthy body of water for hundreds of miles in any direction, making the surrounding forest effectively a cool, green desert. At any given hour, dozens or even hundreds of animals visit the pool to drink. It's unknown how deep the pool goes, but some believe that it's bottomless. The final site that isn't a realm is the Forbidden Plateau. It's an enormously wide plateau of volcanic stone deep in the primeval rainforests, not far from Oceanus, rising hundreds of feet above the surrounding canopy, vertically isolated from the rest of the layer. Since magic that allows flight doesn't function in the Beastlands, the Forbidden Plateau is rather difficult to reach, thus its name and its mysterious reputation. Furthering the mystery, there's talk, even as far as Sigil, of the creatures that live atop the plateau. Strange beasts, even for the Beastlands. Numerous expeditions have set out to find a way up the plateau, only to come back beat up and exhausted, but without having made it up there. And many a supposed great hunter has taken up the challenge, only to never come back. Some of the signers believe the Forbidden Plateau is where the Beastlands hides its secrets. It's not impossible to get up there, though. Climbing up several hundred feet of sheer basaltic rock probably is, but there are hidden tunnels, crevices, and caves that can provide access to the top for those who know where to look. And of course, if you have the ability to fly, or some creature to fly on, that'll do the trick. Life thrives on top of the plateau, just as it does anywhere else in the Beastlands. As most of the creatures up there can't leave, it's a self-sufficient ecosystem. The plateau itself is concave, with the ground gently sloping downward to the plateau's center, where all the rainfall has formed a sizable lake with giant fish and impossibly large creatures. And the rest of the plateau is much the same, as it's a land ruled by megafauna, specifically dinosaurs, though there are dinosaurs of all types and sizes here, not just the huge ones. There's plesiosaurs, ankylosaurs, triceratops, allosaurs, velociraptors, tyrannosaurs, and more. The presence of such fearsome beasts makes it dangerous enough, but what's worse is that because the plateau is so isolated, the dinosaurs that live here notice anything foreign to the plateau very quickly, and will come to investigate, and it's very hard to escape. But it's not all just dinosaurs, as green-furred beastmen live up here as well. And apparently they're less inclined toward good than their counterparts on the prime-material plane, aggressively attacking any who tread into their territory. These beastmen and the dinosaurs are why most of the expeditions that make it here at all never return. Naturally, most people don't know what's up here, but those who do wonder why the dinosaurs are here. Do the dinosaurs have an animal lord? Perhaps many? Perhaps they live high above the rest of the Beastlands because if they lived with all the other animals, they'd be too efficient and threaten the balance of nature, wiping out other species entirely. Or it might even be the other way around. Perhaps dinosaurs would be too attractive a target for the big game hunters of the multiverse that they've been hidden away for their own preservation. Some think they're up here to protect something. Perhaps some magical artifacts, a long-lost ancient civilization, or a god who wants privacy so badly that they'd raise a stone column several hundred feet in the air and stock it with rare, incredibly dangerous beasts. I feel like this plateau would have to be rather huge to accommodate all of the dinosaur souls who come here in death. Surely this can't be the only place in all of the infinite Beastlands where there are dinosaurs. Or perhaps the plateau itself is infinite. Perhaps it exists in some mind-bending way that the planes are known for, like how I think of some of the planes themselves, where it has a finite boundary, but an infinite amount of space within that boundary. Perhaps the distances within the plateau aren't constant. And one thing I wonder is why the Planescape books give such special treatment to the dinosaurs, like it's some extremely unexpected thing that they'd be here. There are plenty of other gigantic and powerful and cool creatures everywhere else, all throughout the Outer Planes. And it's not like dinosaurs are even extinct in D&D. They exist in Faerun and Chult. But whatever the reason, the secret of their existence has leaked to some members of the Vile Hunt, who, in one Planescape adventure, have teamed up with devils to capture dinosaurs and bring them through a portal to the Grey Waste to be used against the demons in the Blood War. What the Vile Hunt gets out of this is the certain deaths of these beasts. However, what the devils know, and the Vile Hunt don't, is that the dinosaurs of the Forbidden Plateau aren't sapient like so many of the other animals of the Beastlands. Krigala is home to several gods, 9 of them, actually. There's Skerrit, Elona, Myliki, Corlin, Remnis, Nobanian, Shialia, Thardhar, and Ubteo. And there's also tons of animal lords, who are practically gods, but none of the realms of the animal lords of Krigala are given descriptions. Skerrit is the patron deity of centaurs, though not all centaurs worship him. Some instead worship Sylvanas, and some worship no gods at all. Skerrit is a neutral god of community and balance. His realm is called Skerrit's Glade. It's a secluded, pastoral realm of close-knit centaur communities in a forest in the foothills of Krigala's mountains. The grass here is thick and soft, and tastes even sweeter than the waters of Oceanus. The light of Celera here is filtered, softened, and subdued. The glade is so serene that all creatures who spend at least a day here gain +1 to all wisdom checks for the duration of their stay in the Beastlands. Though centaurs are private creatures and wary of outsiders, so not all who wish to enter the realm are allowed to, depending on who greets you. Dila Chestnut is one of the foremost servants or proxies of Skerrit, and a well-respected member of the realm, welcoming most who come with good intentions. Arcadion Russetmane is a centaur responsible for patrolling the borders of the glade, and is more likely to throw people out, especially humans, but he makes an exception for elves. The centaurs of Skerrit's Glade are said to be skilled with herb lore, potions, and natural cures, so this realm is a good place to look if you're in need of healing. Skerrit is a member of the outer circle of the Seelie Court, and so the gods of that traveling realm can sometimes be found here paying him a visit, such as Faunel, goddess of the Swan Maze, Amantiensian, god of the Treants, and Ecthiarn, god of the Unicorns. And occasionally the entire Seelie Court will visit all at once. Elona is the goddess of forests and meadows from Greyspace, the crystal sphere of the Greyhawk campaign setting. Her realm is known as the Grove of the Unicorns. It's a cluster of great sequoias that form a natural cathedral. The lowest branches are hundreds of feet in the air, giving plenty of room for those with wings to fly. All who reside within the realm live in peace with the trees and the animals, as Elona is a goddess who believes in a beneficial nature, one that is tranquil and bountiful, rather than the more savage nature, red of tooth and claw, represented throughout much of the rest of the plane. All spells that create food and water are maximized in this realm, and all spells cast by rangers last twice as long as normal. The grove attracts groups of unicorns, and many of Elona's petitioners take on the shape of unicorns, though some take on the shape of other animals. Well, this information is coming from 3rd edition, where petitioners of the Beastlands start as regular people and the primal change slowly transforms them into animals. So I suppose it's more accurate to say that some slowly become unicorns and some slowly become other animals. But even the non-unicorns grow features reminiscent of unicorns. The realm is far bigger on the inside than the outside. If you're a friend of nature, you might see a unicorn drinking from a pool in the center of the grove. If you do, the realm will open itself up to you in full. If you don't, it'll look just like any old grove to you, and you could walk right through it without even realizing what it is. Myliki is the Finnish goddess of forests and nature. Keep in mind that while gods from real-world mythology exist in D&D, there's often differences between their in-game version and their real-life version. Myliki is a goddess that didn't used to have a realm at all, and would just hide in the forests of prime material worlds, only coming out to destroy those who despoil nature. But at some point, she started to share the Grove of the Unicorns with Alona. And that's a bit strange, because Myliki also joined the Faerunian pantheon in an effort to keep herself relevant, as some of her fellow Finnish gods are fading away due to lack of worshippers. So Myliki is a Finnish goddess who's a member of the Faerunian pantheon, but sharing a realm with an Orthian deity. Corlin is the patron deity of the Kenku. Kenku are basically bird people, though there are 2 quite different types of creatures, both named Kenku. The first ones are winged and are like half-human, half-hawk hybrids from 1st and 2nd edition. The other type are wingless and are more like half-human, half-ravens, and are a bit more sinister. I'm talking about the winged ones. Corlin is a neutral god of trickery and thievery. The story goes that he was actually the botched experimental creation of some lawful sky god too embarrassed to admit his failure. But Corlin proved his worth through trickery, deceit, disguise, and thievery, and so the creator god granted him independence, as well as a race created in Corlin's image. But apparently, Corlin didn't want a race created after him. He didn't want the responsibility, and felt himself too weak to protect his people. So he teaches them what he knows of thievery, disguise, and magic so that they can protect themselves. His realm is known as Filchnest, and there isn't really any information about it. Remnis is the patron deity of giant eagles. That might make him sound like he should be an animal lord, but giant eagles are a sapient race, like in Lord of the Rings. Though, I wouldn't be surprised if he served double duty, and was also the animal lord for regular eagles. Remnis is a neutral god of the sky and service, and in that capacity often serves as a mount for other sky gods. He flies and hunts through many planes, including the elemental plane of air, the Outlands, Mechanus, Limbo, Elysium, and Arborea. But his true realm is here in Krigala, known as Golden Roost. Nobanian is the god of lions, good-aligned beasts, Lamassu, Wemix, and royalty. Like Remnis, I imagine that he's both an animal lord and a god in his own right. Nobanian is actually based on Aslan from the Chronicles of Narnia, and in fact, his first appearance in D&D was under the name Aslan. He's a god of Faerun, but he wasn't originally from that crystal sphere, coming from one of the gates in the Weathercoat Wood, which is essentially the wood between worlds from the first Narnia book, The Magician's Nephew. So I guess Narnia is just canonically part of D&D. Nobanian's realm is known as the Pridelands, but in the World Tree cosmology of the Forgotten Realms in 3rd edition, it's in the plane known as the House of Nature, though that's true of a lot of these gods of the Beastlands. Shialia is the goddess of growth, Chorids, which are like dwarf satyrs, and pregnant forest creatures. She is a planter of seeds and a nurturer of seedlings, rejoicing in life and shielding against death. She's a rather minor god and serves Myliki. Her realm is called the High Glade, and it's nearby the Grove of the Unicorns. Thard-Har is the dwarven god of jungle survival and hunting, and patron deity of the wild dwarves. He's a member of the dwarven pantheon, but a rather distant and reclusive one. He has no tolerance for civilization or social constraints of any kind. He can be found wandering all 3 layers of the Beastlands, but his realm is actually the Forbidden Plateau, which, according to the World Tree cosmology, is on the outskirts of the plane of Dwarfhome, where the whole dwarven pantheon resides. Ubteo is the patron deity and creator of Chult, that region of Faerun I mentioned earlier with all the dinosaurs. And indeed, he's a god of dinosaurs, jungles, and creation. According to at least one source, he's also a god for the tabaxi. Ubteo is endlessly patient and rarely emotional, standing aloof from the daily doings of the world and his followers. It's said that Ubteo created the jungle as a test for his people, a maze for them to pass through on their way to the afterlife. But his primary realm is also a maze, known as the Labyrinth of Life, located in the Outlands. He keeps a secondary realm in the Beastlands, which is the Forbidden Plateau, shared with Thardhar. In the World Tree cosmology, the Forbidden Plateau is a part of the Labyrinth of Life, which is a part of the House of Nature. What's weird, though, is, like I just said, the Forbidden Plateau is also part of Dwarfhome, and those two pieces of information come from the same book. I guess those planes must overlap. Brux, the second layer of the Beastlands, is the land of eternal twilight. Here, the sun Selira and the moon Noctos are evenly balanced. The sun is still visible in the sky, on the horizon, either perpetually setting or rising, depending on your perspective, and Noctos is a half-moon here, absorbing much of Selira's heat and light, making this layer significantly cooler and darker than Krigala, covering everything in a constant half-light. Though according to 1st edition, Brux has a reddish sky, illuminated by 2 suns, one on each end of the horizon. Mists, fogs, and clouds are common here, further shrouding the sun's light, and long shadows fill much of the layer. To get what light they can, all of the plants in Brux face the sun. Just like Krigala, every type of terrain can be found here, though forests generally dominate the landscape, and the roots and branches of Yggdrasil wend their way through the layer. But the river Oceanus doesn't run through this layer. The animals of Brux are all those that would be crepuscular in the real world, which means active during the hours of dawn, matutinal, or dusk, vespertinal. Time passes normally on this layer, though you wouldn't know it, and newcomers often get the eerie sense that the world is frozen at sunset. This layer is generally more dangerous than Krigala, as the deep shadows can make it all too easy to unintentionally wander into the hiding place of a fierce predator. The shadows are said by some to hold passages to secret realms and treasures long lost from the prime material plane. Items that people believe to be safely locked away in some dark vault or shadowed crypt, but disappear nonetheless, are said to appear in this layer, at least some of them. And some believe this is due to some mysterious connection with the demiplane of shadow, which in the terms of 4th edition and later would be the Shadowfell. Brux is home to another outpost of the Sign of One, known as Waysign. Like Signpost on Krigala, it's a small, rough-and-tumble town, though there is no equivalent of the Dreamhearth here, and it's smaller, so it sees less activity. Also, like its sister town, it's situated near the border of 2 layers, Brux and Karasuthra, presumably in the same sort of way as the other town, near a cliff overlooking the 3rd layer, caught in an eternal 1/4 light. Also, like Krigala, there's a town of the Al-Karak Alam, or Avarials, here, this one known as Al-Karak Alam Jankal. It sits high above the mist-laden lands of Brux, the canopy of branches woven into homes, covering a square mile horizontally and a half-mile vertically, though about a mile above the ground at its lowest point, so it's not exactly the type of town you'll have an easy time gaining access to, or even finding. Though the town is more expansive than at first would appear necessary to non-winged folks, and thus seemingly underpopulated, because the winged elves, predatory birds, and giant eagles that live here all need lots of room for their wide wings. Avarials are highly reclusive creatures, and very rarely initiate contact with others. But if you seek them out and aren't evil and don't openly use fire, as both their homes and their wings are highly vulnerable to fire, they may be convinced to help you. Al-Karak Alam society is divided into 2 halves. There's the hunters, trackers, and warriors, and then there's the craftsmen, artisans, and philosophers. And this town supports a good mix of both who get along well with each other. Though there is something of a schism starting to form, as the worship of the elven sky goddess Erdrifania is growing among the latter group. Most of Ariels worship Erdrifania, but those that dwell in the Beastlands are typically a bit less chaotically inclined and more in tune with nature, so they've traditionally worshipped Remnis, the god of giant eagles, though they're planers, not petitioners. The town's foremost archer and informal ruler, Jonaus the Sure-Sighted, is actually a cleric of Remnis. He's not very welcoming to outsiders, perhaps because it's not uncommon for people to come to Brux looking to hunt the Alcarak Alam, as their wings are very useful in creating magical items like flying potions or rings of feather falling. It turns out the Forbidden Plateau isn't the only place in the Beastlands with dinosaurs, at least in 3rd edition, because Brux has the Valley of Thunder, though perhaps you could think of this as an alternative to the Forbidden Plateau, as the only other 3rd edition source that mentions the plateau, that I can find anyway, uses the World Tree cosmology, where the Beastlands isn't a thing. But like the Forbidden Plateau, in the Valley of Thunder, the dinosaurs are the undisputed masters. Those who visit the valley and find a bone or tooth from a freshly killed dinosaur, grind it into powder, and sprinkle it over their head, gain the ability to cause their skin to harden into dinosaur-like armor plating once per day, up to 4 times, until they return to do it again. The rest of the described locations in Brux are all realms of the gods, of which there are 6. Ferrix, Balador, Puchan, Denir, Melil, and Hala Brightaxe. And there's also the Cat Lord, who is probably the most well-known animal lord. Her realm is known as the Cat Lord's Prowl. It's a quiet realm. Too quiet for most who happen upon it. It's the kind of silence that you expect to be broken at any moment by a roar, a leap from the shadows, and a quick death. It's, for the most part, a peaceful place, but the peace here is tentative, tense, and transitory. Even though all cats are her petitioners, or at least most cats, as there's the question of whether some lions are instead bound to Nobanian, there's only ever a small amount of them in her realm. Only a select few, those who have exemplified the feline form, are invited to stay with the Cat Lord. The rest are out elsewhere in the Beastlands, living their natural lives. The Cat Lord doesn't get along well with the Egyptian goddess Bast, as her petitioners also take the form of cats, and as such the Cat Lord believes they should venerate her. The Cat Lord's Prowl isn't a stationary place. It's sometimes found deep within the misty glades of Brux, but once the realm's pride of cats has hunted an area to the point where nature's balance would be affected if they stayed longer, they move on to a new location. The current Cat Lord prefers Brux, but previous Cat Lords have had other preferences, so the Cat Lord's Prowl has been found throughout all the layers of the Beastlands. If you manage to find this realm without immediately being eaten, you'll be dragged before the Cat Lord. She generally listens to what visitors have to say, though she's vain and fickle, and you've really got to satisfy her ego if you want to last long. But if your presence in the realm is accepted, you'll get the benefit of incredible sleep. Those staying here can sleep in any position, even with all their armor on, and gain all the benefits of sleep in half the time, so long rests take half as long. The Cat Lord can also be a good source of information, as everything any cat knows, she knows too. Aside from that, this realm has little to offer, unless you like raw meat. The Cat Lord's Prowl is also home to Ferrix, the god of were-tigers, so some of her petitioners can be found here too. Ferrix is a neutral god of play, curiosity, and hunting, and while she is often found here, she does wander the rest of Brux too. Balador is the patron deity of werebears. He's a chaotic good god of protection and fraternity, and the brother of Ferrix. His realm is called Ursus. It's a tiny realm in an idyllic alpine valley high in the mountains of Brux, filled with the warm, smoky aromas from carefully tended campfires. It's like a quaint, comfortable campsite, or tribal village, of colorfully painted tents surrounding a central fire. Both the village and the small mountain valley in which it resides are named Ursus. No evil lycanthropes can enter the realm, and the word lycanthrope literally means wolfman or werewolf, but here it's referring to all were creatures, not just the wolf variety. Also, anybody who's been afflicted with lycanthropy but hasn't yet changed alignment because of it can find a cure here. To others, all that really can be offered is a hearty meal, a place near the fire, and a blanket, in exchange for a good tale. Though Ursus is also a great place to go for those looking for counsel in all matters having to do with the protection of nature, as Balador and his followers are extremely wise, and second to none on this topic. They also seem to know more about the idea that the Beastlands itself is alive, but they keep most of what they know to themselves. Puchan is the Vedic god of relationships and travelers. In real-world mythology, his name is Pushan, or Pusan, and he's a sun deity as well. In D&D, he's often worshipped by Planeswalkers, those who travel the planes. Puchan is a psychopomp, or soul guide, ushering the dead to the realm of Yama, another Vedic god who resides in Mechanus. Puchan brings all things to proper relationship with one another, blesses marriages, and protects people from exploitation with his golden lance. His realm is known as Restwheel, and there really isn't any information about it. Denir is the Faerunian god of literature and art, as well as glyphs, scribes, and cartography. He is consumed by the pursuit of the metatext, a single work of writing that, when read, reveals the secrets of the multiverse, catapulting its reader to the heights of godhood. Though the metatext isn't some book somewhere that just needs to be physically found, it's more of an ideal, something that exists metaphysically, and snippets of it are reflected in every text ever written. It's said that Denir gained his status as a lesser god by glimpsing the merest portion of it. Denir serves Ogma, the Faerunian god of knowledge, invention, and inspiration, and Ogma suspects that Denir is chasing shadows of the mind, following the half-imagined ramblings of 1,000 mad scholars. But Denir is not deterred, and has made it his mission to preserve copies of everything that has ever been written. His realm is known as the Library of All Knowledge. I find it very odd that his realm would be in the Beastlands, of all places. In the World Tree cosmology, it's in a plane called the House of Knowledge. But the House of Knowledge, a bit contrary to its name, is actually a wilderness of ancient oaks and clear blue pools, and is dedicated to the living knowledge of song and story and the understanding that comes from deep familiarity with other living creatures, not just ancient secrets in dusty books and scrolls. So that does make it a bit more fitting. The Library of All Knowledge is a collection of buildings scattered throughout the House of Knowledge that collectively hold every spell, magic item, song, and fact about the entire multiverse. Malil is the Faerunian god of poetry and song. He is the ultimate performer and a patron to bards. He resides in the Library of All Knowledge with Denir, or the House of All Knowledge according to the World Tree cosmology, and alongside Denir serves as one of the two hands of Ogma. Hela Brightaxe is the dwarven goddess of luck in battle and patron deity of dwarves who love to fight and who battle monsters. Her realm is known as Findar Ender, a simple cave hidden by ever-present mists in the depths of a forest, though she's rarely there, and instead is out in the prime material plane where dwarves are enjoying battle but in need of aid. But there's actually more than 6 gods who can be found in Brux, as the Seelie Court makes a habit of coming here now and again. The Seelie Court moves between the 3 planes of chaotic goodness, Isgard, Arborea, and the Beastlands. When the court comes to the Beastlands, it might come to any layer, but the fairies seem to like this twilight layer the most. Wherever the court is, it manifests as a magical woodland with calm glades sparkling with dew, full of fey creatures. It's ruled by Queen Titania, goddess of fairies, friendship, and magic, with her consort by her side, Oberon, fairy god of beasts. The inner circle of the court includes those 2 gods, as well as Veranestra, fairy goddess of charm and beauty, Dav, fairy god of song and dance, Skelly, fairy god of trickery and illusion, and Ecthiarn, fairy god of healing, loyalty, and protection. The outer circle, who make up the fringes of the court, include Kuevan, fairy god of food and friendship, Amantianzian, fairy god of trees and magic, Fenella, fairy goddess of communication and sorority, Nair Skayak, fairy god of mischief, and Scarret, who of course has his own realm in Krigala. The Seelie Court can be a dangerous place to visit. For one thing, the flow of time isn't consistent here. It can flow more quickly or more slowly within the court than without. So you might enter, stay a night or 2, and leave to find that all your friends died 50 years ago. Glimpses of the past and future can be seen in reflective surfaces, like pools of water. And for another thing, it can be rather unwise to accept gifts of any kind in the court, as that may bind you in fealty to the gift giver. If you'd like a bit more information about the Seelie Court, I covered it in my Guide to Arborea. Karasuthra, the 3rd layer, is the land of eternal night. Here, the sun Celera can't even be seen at all, and the full moon Noctos rules the sky, providing the layer's only illumination. Though of course, as I mentioned earlier, in 1st edition it's the randomly wandering stars that illuminate the layer, and in 3rd edition it's both the stars and moon, which does change phases, just incredibly slowly. But anyway, so strong is Noctos' reign over Karasuthra that he prevents any non-magical light source from alighting. Flint and steel don't spark, campfires can't be lit, torches won't burn, and neither will lamp oil. Noctos doesn't prevent fires because he doesn't like them or anything, but in order to keep the Beastlands balanced. Krigala is always well lit, so Karasuthra can never be. Though his influence is only so powerful, and so magical sources of light still function here. But they're only half as bright as normal, illuminating half the distance and lasting half the normal duration. Same with non-magical light sources that were lit in other layers or planes. So if you lit a torch in Brux and then walked through a portal to Karasuthra, your torch would stay lit, but it would be half as bright as it was in Brux, and it would burn out twice as quickly, and also it is incapable of lighting any other fires. Even though there's no sun, plants still grow and flourish under the light of the moon. But while the moon does provide illumination, Karasuthra is overall still quite dark. The animals of this layer are those that would be nocturnal in the real world, and generally speaking, Karasuthra is home to some of the fiercest and most dangerous predators, well hidden in the dark. But the majority of burrowing and underground dwelling animals make their homes in this layer as well, apparently being more comfortable here than the other two. Some people travel to this layer hoping to hunt the most dangerous of game, and others come here to explore the tunnels dug by the biggest of the burrowing animals, hoping to find untold treasures within their layers. Though the animals of the Beastlands aren't interested in material wealth, so any treasure that might be found within these burrows is entirely incidental, such as deposits of valuable gems and minerals. Like the possible connection between the Demiplane of Shadow and Brux in 2nd edition, 3rd edition suggests that there might be a connection between Karasuthra and what's now the Plane of Shadow, depending on your cosmology. As it generally goes with the deeper layers of the Outer Planes, Karasuthra has fewer described locations than Krigala and Brux. What I find interesting is that this map of the Beastlands shows locations in each of the layers, and the locations for Krigala and Brux are all described, or at least mentioned, in the Planescape books, but not so for Karasuthra. There's the Black Desert and the Forgotten Lake that I didn't find mentioned anywhere else, though of course it's possible I missed them somewhere. This book mentions a magical spring in Karasuthra whose waters can restore life to the dead, though the beasts of the plain avoid it for some reason, perhaps because of a fearsome guardian, a terrible curse laid upon it, or that they simply fear the power of the spring itself. And this might be referring to the Forgotten Lake. But other locations include the Wereglade and the Labyrinth of Fiery Doom. The Wereglade is deep within one of the forests of Karasuthra, a place where the trees part, making room for a circle of ancient obelisks scrawled with generations of beast marks. The forest clearing allows the full light of the moon to shine down upon the stones, which in turn seem to glow with a light of their own. The two central boulders, seemingly pushing up from the earth, with just their tips revealed, are known as the Stone of Wailing and the Stone of Lament. Werewolves and other were-creatures frequently meet in this glade to dance under the lambent moon. Those who visit the glade and add a beast mark of their own gain a limited form of lycanthropy, capable of turning into a wolf or wolf hybrid 2 times until they return to do it again, though they're unable to pass on the curse of lycanthropy as normal werewolves can. The Labyrinth of Fiery Doom is a cave complex secluded in the darkest corner of the layer. The cave's twists and turns too smooth and maze-like to be natural. Acrid steam vents from the ground, lakes of mud bubble, and rivers of boiling water flow throughout the cave, which is said to have been corrupted by the presence of the cave's inhabitants, a huge, terrible ancient red dragon and his evil Tanari lover. At least, so they say. You might find it odd that such a blatantly evil place exists in the Beastlands, and so too might all of this layer's inhabitants. They probably expect it to get cosmically realigned sooner or later, and until then, they stay away from this foul place. But in truth, and this is a truth that is known to almost no one, it's all a ruse. The red dragon is actually an Agathanon Asimon named Jannar, who uses his shape-shifting ability to take on the form of a dragon when anyone comes snooping around. And the Tanari succubus is actually an Erinyes named Nalura. Erinyes and succubi aren't all that different from each other, though. They're both incredibly attractive fiends who use seduction to corrupt mortals. But Erinyes are Beatezu, or devils, and succubi are Tanari, or demons. So she just subtly alters her appearance to look like one. And despite being a devil, Nalura isn't evil anymore, thanks to the influence of Jannar. You see, they both were on missions in the prime material plane when they began to fall in love, before realizing that they were supposed to be mortal enemies, as they were taking other forms to keep their true nature a secret. In a way, they both fulfilled their purposes. Nalura seduced a paragon of purity, and Jannar turned a devil's lustful nature to true love. But knowing that they'd be doomed if they were found out by their respective masters, they decided to make a run for it. They eventually settled in this spot, which is relatively untraveled due to its geothermic activity, and they set up this whole facade to stay in hiding, hoping that the region's peculiar environment would add to the aura of fear generated by their fabricated personas. They also chose this spot because it reminded Nalura of home. And what even they don't know is that it actually is a part of her home, as the Labyrinth of Fiery Doom was once a part of the fourth layer of Beator, Phlegathos, which must have cosmically realigned at some point in the past, which is why the place seems so foul. Presumably over time it will fade and blend in more with the rest of the Beastlands. The rest of the described locations in this layer are realms. Karasuthra is home to 6 gods, maybe 7. Stronmaus, Kura Okami, Chislev, Habakkuk, Zivalin, Larue, and Relivar Danuvian. There's also the countless animal lords of the layer, as usual, with perhaps the most well-known one being the Owl Lord. The Owl Lord's domain, known as the Owl Lord's Soar in the low branches of Karasuthra, is a land of silent, winged death to any who offend him. The Owl Lord is always alert, wise, and watchful for prey and foes. And like most animal lords, the Owl Lord doesn't much want anything to do with visitors, unless they have something to offer him, such as knowledge, for which he has an insatiable appetite. He's aloof with those other than his followers, not inclined to meddle in the affairs of other species. In human form, he resembles a wise old man with large eyes that miss nothing. He's short in stature, but incredibly fast. In bird form, he resembles a huge, great-horned owl, impossible to sneak up on and undetectable when he wants to be. Like the Cat Lord's prowl, the Owl Lord's soar isn't in a permanent location, though it is always in Karasuthra. He and his owls roam the forests, plains, and meadows, looking for hollow trees to roost in. Stronmaus is the most powerful deity in the Beastlands. He's the giant god of the sky, weather, and joy, and patron deity of cloud and storm giants. His realm is called Stormhold, a realm of crashing thunder, pelting rain, and booming laughter. It's a mighty palace with lofty spires and soaring towers, all spun from the purest gold, platinum, gems, and marble, sitting atop a thunderstorm cloud high in Karasuthra's night-black sky. The realm is always accompanied by at least one Mortai, as Stronmaus and the Mortai seem to enjoy each other's company. The signers of the Beastlands debate whether Stormhold is held up by a cloud through the power of Stronmaus himself, through the will of his Mortai friends, both, or neither. The cloud supporting Stormhold is dotted with communities of cloud and storm giant petitioners. More camps than towns, they spend most of their time in the open, gathering cloud stuff and the essence of storms for Stronmaus' daily feasts. Since spells that allow flight or control over the air, wind, and weather don't work in the Beastlands, this realm can be quite a difficult one to reach. Though if you do reach it, and you aren't evil, you're granted the ability to resist heat and cold for the rest of your stay in this plane. And if you're in need of healing, you can take a dip in the magical opal pool within the palace. It appears 100 feet long from the outside, but is infinitely long when you get in. It has the ability to heal any being that Stronmaus chooses. And as Stormhold constantly roams this layer, you might even find yourself deposited near wherever you were trying to go, though the Cloud Castle isn't going to change course all for you. Kura Okami is the Japanese god, or kami, of rain and snow. In Shinto mythology, Kura Okami is a dragon, one of several gods born from the decapitation of Kagutsuchi, the Japanese fire god. His realm is called the Misty Valley. Chislev is the goddess of nature and animals from the Dragonlance campaign setting, the crystal sphere known as Krinspace. According to legend, the seasons change with the moods of her heart. As a neutral goddess, she can be furious and dangerous as a hurricane, or calm as a meadow in spring. Habakkuk is the Krynnish god of animals, seas, and creation. Despite being a god of neutral good, he is feral and merciless and cruel as a wolf, but also gentle and timid as a rabbit. He embodies the natural harmony of predator and prey, as much feared as he is loved. Zivalin is the Krynnish god of wisdom, foresight, and prophecy. He is a neutral god, often depicted as a great tree. His branches reach into every time and place, into the past and future, at least according to Dragonlance lore. All three of these gods have the same realm, Zan, the grand forest beyond the world. Though the cosmology of Dragonlance is different, with the gods of good residing in a plane called the Dome of Creation, the gods of neutrality in the Hidden Vale, and the gods of evil in the Abyss. Zan, the greatest and most pristine of all forests, surrounds the Hidden Vale, so Chislev and Zivalin can be found there, though Habakkuk would then be in the Dome of Creation. Larue is the Faerunian goddess of talking beasts and intelligent non-humanoids. Worship of the lion and the unicorn, as Nobanian and Larue are often called, are often connected. She actually isn't a god of the Beastlands, at least not yet. She has so far just stuck to the prime world of Toril of the Forgotten Realms, but she seems to be preparing a realm on Karasuthra in order to be a bit closer to Nobanian. Relivar Danuvian is the elven god of frost sprites and protection from the elements. He's a patron to snow elves, though not their foremost patron, and acts as a ward against severe cold. He's a lesser member of the Seldarine, the pantheon of elven deities, most of whom reside in Arborea. His realm is called the Ice Plane, and there's not much information about it, though I think we can gather that it's an Arctic wilderness, but with the magical charm and enchantment characteristic of all elven lands. And that's the complete guide to the Beastlands. I hope you enjoyed it, especially the extended discussion about the morality of this plane, as those are my favorite parts of these videos. And as much as I talked about how this plane doesn't make sense being neutral, chaotic, good, I do still like it as a plane. I just think it should be somewhere else in the Outer Planes. If you did enjoy this video, consider subscribing to my channel or checking out some of my other videos. I have 2 Planescape playlists, one in the order in which I've made these videos, and one in a viewing order that I think makes more sense. And if you liked my discussion on morality, you might enjoy some of my other non-Planescape videos as well. If this isn't the first video of mine that you've enjoyed, then please consider becoming a Patreon supporter. For as little as $2 a month, my supporters get access to update posts, ad-free videos, scripts, audio-only videos weeks before the full video, and they get their names at the end of my videos, as well as the ability to vote on future videos. And if you want to support what I do, but get something physical out of it as well, then consider using code WadeAllen at dicenest.com for 15% off your order of some luxury dice. But whether you're a subscriber, a Patreon supporter, or neither, thank you for watching.